On August 14, 2011, a haunting 911 call came through in Fairfield, Indiana. John Carter, age 23, reported his fiancée was missing from their town home. The police sprang into action, but 21-year-old Caitlin Markham was nowhere to be found. Months passed, and just when it seemed all hope was lost, a chilling discovery linked to Caitlin's disappearance emerged. As the shock waves ripple through the community, an anonymous benefactor stepped forward with a significant donation. What clues did they uncover? And what twists does this case hold? Fairfield, Indiana is an intriguing area with several notable features. One interesting aspect is its rich agricultural heritage. Known as the seed corn capital of the world, Fairfield has a long-standing tradition of seed production. According to the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program, the violent crime in Fairfield, Indiana in 2022 was 2.2 per thousand residents, which is lower than the national average of 4.5 per thousand residents. The number of people who have disappeared in Fairfield, Indiana in recent years is relatively low. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, there have been 10 people reported missing from Fairfield since February 2018. Of these, 8 have been found safe and 2 remain missing. But it was here in this relatively peaceful county that Caitlin Markham was nowhere to be found in 2011. Caitlin Markham was born on August 16, 1990 in Hamilton County, Ohio. Little is known about her early life, but she studied graphic arts while also working at a bridal shop. Caitlin had a bright and cheery personality. She always wanted everyone around her to be happy and in a good mood. In 2010, 20-year-old Caitlin got engaged to 22-year-old John Carter, her long-term boyfriend. After she finished school, Caitlin and her fiancé, Carter, planned to move to Colorado. They had been together for 6 years and engaged for 1, but an unexpected tragedy was awaiting to shock them. 3 days prior to Caitlin Markham's 21st birthday on August 13, 2011 was the last time she was seen. Her fiancé Carter said he saw her around midnight on the 13th, but then couldn't get in touch with her all the next day. Gripped by panic, Carter also reached out to Caitlin's father, David Markham, and told him that Caitlin was missing. He immediately screamed into the phone, "Caitlin's missing." On the evening of August 14, 2011, the 911 emergency helpline received a call from Carter. "Careful. 911. Where's your emergency? Hi. My name is John Carter. I know that you're not supposed to report a missing person after before 24 hours, but my fiancée is missing. I can't find her anywhere." "Okay. Where'd you see her last?" "I saw her at like 12 o'clock last night. Car is still there. The person's still okay. And you're out there now?" "I'm heading out there now. I have been trying to get a hold of her, and I decided to go by her house to see if she was okay. And her car was still there, which is why I'm really freaking out." "Okay. And you guys didn't have an argument or anything?" "Not at all. And the Sacred Heart Festival is going on right up the street, and there's a lot of questionable people there." It had been 18 hours since John Carter claimed to have last seen his fiancée, Caitlin Markham. When David heard the news, consumed by worry, he hurried to his daughter's place. There he was met by Fairfield Police Department's Detective Rebecca Irvin, who had arrived swiftly in response to the distressing situation. Upon entering Caitlin's condo, Irvin began her thorough investigation, meticulously examining every corner. Yet nothing stood out as a clear indicator of what had transpired. There were no signs of forced entry and no traces of a struggle within Caitlin's bedroom. "There's no signs of forced entry into the town home. We checked the doors, checked the windows, checked everywhere. There's nothing that's jumping out. There's no signs of a struggle." As the investigators from the Fairfield Police Department delved deeper, they made a discovery. Caitlin's purse and car keys were found abandoned in the middle of her bed. The bedroom also harbored Caitlin's loyal companion, Murphy, her dog, who had been locked in the room. It struck them as odd since they were told that Caitlin had never locked up her beloved pet before this. Her purse and car keys were placed in the center of the bed, a detail that Detective Irvin couldn't ignore. The dog had been locked in her bedroom, which she's not usually locked in the bedroom, and he had gone to the bathroom in there. Her purse and her keys were smack dab in the middle of her bed. "If I'm going to bed, I don't put something right in the middle of it. Nothing seemed to make any sense at all. It struck her as peculiar since one doesn't typically arrange belongings like that before settling in for the night. The Fairfield police thought that something was amiss. Testimonies from friends and family further emphasized the oddness of the situation, as it was entirely out of character for Caitlin to go out without notice. With just 3 weeks remaining until her graduation from art school, her engagement to Carter, and their imminent move to Colorado, she appeared genuinely content and brimming with excitement for the future. This was not for her not to call anybody, for her not to do anything. I felt something was wrong, so nobody could understand why Caitlin would run away from home. In the midst of this, the suspense surrounding Caitlin's mysterious disappearance grew. 20 heartbreaking months passed without a clue. But then finally there was a break in the case. On April 7, 2013, a husband and wife were scavenging for metal to recycle along Big Cedar Road in Franklin County, Indiana. As they searched, they stumbled upon a startling discovery. Just, digging through this little area here, picking up some metal on here. Found a jawbone right on the other side of that little tree right there, right between them two little trees. Wife that were looking for metal to recycle along Big Cedar Road in Franklin County, Indiana. While they were searching for the metals, they located some human bones, and I was called to investigate the remains. Alarmed, they promptly alerted the authorities, who arrived to investigate the remains. The site where the bones were found was in Indiana, nearly 25 miles away from Caitlin's town home, tucked amidst discarded trash and a not-so-known dumping area. Crime scene investigators cleared away debris, uncovering multiple bones, including a skull and jawbone. Their attention was drawn to a protruding tooth that caught their eye, an easily recognizable feature. Reacting swiftly, one of the county sheriff's deputies reached for his phone, searching for any missing persons. When we were looking at the skull, we noticed a tooth that was protruding, pretty identifiable. And so one of the county sheriff's deputies, he got on his phone and started looking for anybody that was missing. In a stroke of luck, Caitlin Markham's photo appeared as the first result. Comparing it to her missing report, they couldn't help but notice the striking resemblance, particularly the distinctive protruding tooth. The local forensic anthropologist confirmed the positive identification of the remains as belonging to Caitlin Markham. When we looked at the picture of her missing report, we could almost identify her directly from her teeth. 2 days later, the pastor and detective solemnly shared the heartbreaking news with Caitlin's father. And a couple of days later, I get a knock on the door from the pastor and the detective, and I knew what they were there to tell me. But how in the world did Caitlin end up dead in a trash heap in Indiana, 25 miles away from her native place? In the small town of Fairfield, Ohio, the residents were with no personal connection to the case, but a deep desire for justice and solving unresolved puzzles made a generous donation. This individual, driven by the wish to do something kind before their own passing, provided a substantial sum of money to help with the case. With the infusion of funds, David Markham hired private investigator J. Ryan Green to re-examine the case. He's an individual that wanted to do something nice for somebody before he died, is what he told me. Felt Caitlin needed an outside investigator to come in and take a fresh look at the case. The donor believed that Caitlin's situation required an outsider's perspective to shed new light on the matter. Starting afresh, Green began by carefully listening to the 911 call made by John Carter on the night he reported Caitlin missing. Listening to the call, he learned that Carter had conveyed information that did not sound entirely truthful to the sharpened ears of private investigator Green. Car is still there. The purse is still okay. And you're out there now? I'm heading out there now. I've been trying to get a hold of her, and I decided to go by her house to see if she was okay. And her car was still there, which is why I'm really freaking out. During the 911 call, Carter informed the operator that Caitlin's car and purse were present at her home. However, when asked if he was there, he stated that he was on his way. This discrepancy raised a question in Green's mind. How could Carter know about the car and purse if he hadn't arrived at the scene yet? Additionally, Green highlighted that Carter mentioned visiting Caitlin's house after running an errand before making the 911 call. This sequence of events seemed puzzling. Why would someone prioritize running an errand before expressing panic and seeking immediate help? After this, Green emphasized another portion of the call where Carter said that he and Caitlin did not have a fight or any argument. Okay. And you guys didn't have an argument or anything? Not at all. Green was aware that Caitlin's best friend Michelle had provided a contrasting account of events, saying that Caitlin and Carter had an argument 2 days prior. I knew that they were fighting, and when he was like on the 911 tape when he was saying that they hadn't been arguing at all, I'm just like, why would you lie about that part of it? The question arose. Why would Carter fabricate that particular detail? The Markham family's attorney, who had prior experience as a firefighter and paramedic, listened to the 911 call and made an observation. Typically, a 911 call serves as an urgent plea for assistance. However, in John Carter's case, it seemed more like an informative report. I have heard my share of 911 calls. I've made 911 calls. And a 911 call is usually a call for help. That's what it is. Call for help. John Carter's call was a call to inform. And the Sacred Heart Festival is going on right up the street, and there's a lot of questionable people there. The lawyer also pointed out that Carter quickly put forward a theory, suggesting that some individuals at the carnival had taken his girlfriend. He immediately offered up a theory. You noticed an hour ago that your girlfriend isn't where she's supposed you noticed an hour ago that your girlfriend isn't where she's supposed to be, and the carnies took her? I mean, that's a leap. However, this accusation seemed like a significant leap without substantial evidence. In short, Carter called 911 to inform them about a possible crime when he should have just stuck with the disappearance. Eventually, Caitlin's fiancé underwent a voice stress analysis test, which reportedly yielded inconclusive results. He also took 2 polygraph tests, but the authorities did not disclose the outcomes as it was still too early to draw any conclusions. Meanwhile, private investigator Green placed significant importance on the location where Caitlin's body was discovered, considering it a crucial piece of the puzzle. The location where Caitlin's remains were discovered turned out to be an illegal dump site. This meant that only a few people would be familiar with its existence. This was an illegal dump site where she was found. So somebody knew about the dump site and somebody just tossed her here like a piece of trash. However, someone who was aware of it chose to dispose of Caitlin's remains there. In an insane turn of events, investigator Green made a significant discovery during his inquiry. He uncovered information indicating that the Carter family owned property in the vicinity of the dumping site. The proximity between the illegal dump site and John Carter's family home led Green to believe that connection was more than just a mere coincidence. Troubles me a lot to know that, the Carter family has property in this area. The road leading to the dump site aligned with the route John Carter would have taken to reach his family's property. This fact caught Green's attention. This road is in close proximity to where John Carter would have traveled to go to his family's property. Furthermore, police investigators held the belief that Caitlin met her demise in Ohio and her body was subsequently dumped in Indiana. Based on his investigation, Green developed a theory regarding the involvement of an accomplice in moving Caitlin's body. He focused his attention on Brad Von Bargen, a friend of Carter's who was present at Caitlin's apartment on the night she went missing along with Carter. Notably, Brad had left the apartment earlier than Carter on the night Caitlin disappeared. There was a friend at Caitlin's apartment besides John Carter the last night she was seen. That friend left a little earlier than John did. Additionally, Green discovered that Brad had sold his cherished car, which he referred to as his baby, shortly after Caitlin's remains were found in 2013. When questioned about the rushed sale, Brad claimed it was due to his urgent need to travel to North Carolina. He drove a car that he referred to as his baby, and I found out that he no longer had his baby. He sold it in February 2013, just after Caitlin was found. He sold it in a rush and said that he needed to leave to go to North Carolina. Delving further into the matter, Green managed to track down the car, a green 1997 Hector, which Brad had been driving on the night he departed from Caitlin's home. The authorities conducted a luminol test on the car. To everyone's surprise, they discovered traces of blood in the trunk area. I had it sent to police as a crime scene. They did a luminol test. There was evidence of blood in the trunk area. This significant finding implicated the man, Brad Von Bargen, whom Green believed was the second to last person to have seen Caitlin Markham alive. Unfortunately, this potential breakthrough in the case came too late. The car had been cleaned using shampoos and detergents, which can compromise DNA and blood evidence, as Green pointed out. I obtained a vehicle almost 4 years later. You have extreme cold in Cincinnati, and you have hot weather with the cleaning of the vehicle shampooing that messes with DNA. That messes with blood. And so even after finding blood, the authorities couldn't determine whose blood it was. Despite Green's suspicions, the Fairfield Police Department did not consider Brad to be involved. Detective Irvin clarified that no one could be officially cleared as the investigation was still ongoing. Green remained frustrated by the fact that the car had not been tested at the time of Caitlin's disappearance, and consequently the car angle was no longer a viable lead. Sometime later, Green obtained crucial evidence in the form of cell phone records from the night Caitlin disappeared. These records, according to investigator Green, contradicted previous statements made by John Carter to the police. To further delve into the matter, Carter and his mother Karen joined Green and his team for an interview. Investigator Green meticulously compared cell phone records with Carter's previous interviews regarding the night Caitlin disappeared. The first inconsistency investigated by Green was a text message that Carter claimed to have sent Caitlin saying good morning on the day she went missing. However, the cell phone records obtained by Green indicated that no such message was sent. When confronted with this discrepancy, Carter insisted that he did send the text. But according to the Fairfield police, or according to my phone records, I didn't send her anything. But I could have swore that I had sent her a message. Carter's mother interjected and pointed out another anomaly in the cell phone records: the absence of the 911 call made by Carter. She rightly observed that if the 911 call was missing from the records, the text message incident could also be a result of a glitch or discrepancy. No, he made. Nobody's questioning that, and yet it doesn't show up. Okay. How can we say that just because something else isn't showing up, that there wasn't something else? Moving on, investigator Green turned his attention to a phone call Carter made to his friend Matt on the night Caitlin vanished. Carter's statements to the police indicated that he was on the phone with Matt while driving up to Caitlin's town home. He claimed to have noticed her car in the driveway, which raised concerns. Stop signs here. You turn the corner. You go up into the drive, and you park. You walk across. Is that the way you remember it? Okay. However, a crucial detail emerged from the cell phone records. Carter ended the call with Matt and just 38 seconds later dialed Caitlin's father, David Markham, in a panic state, declaring that Caitlin was missing. Calling David Markham 38 seconds after you hung up with Matt. You wouldn't have even had time to go in the house for 38 seconds. If you're in the parking lot, you wouldn't have had a chance to even go into Caleb Jerome in 38 seconds. The timeline presented a significant inconsistency. According to Green's analysis, it would have been impossible for Carter to park, enter Caitlin's house, search her room, and then call her father within a mere 38 seconds. The limited time frame suggested that Carter already knew Caitlin was gone before entering the house. Although Carter claimed not to remember the exact order of his phone calls, the cell phone records presented a clear sequence of events. In my investigative opinion, that he knew she was gone prior to him going into the house. Green believed that the records strongly indicated that Carter had prior knowledge of Caitlin's absence before entering the house. There were more discrepancies in the investigation of Caitlin Markham's death. David Markham was frustrated by these because, with the help of Green, he found out many details that the Fairfield Police Department could have acted upon but chose not to. David and Green wondered whether there was a miscommunication with the police department itself. On December 18, 2015, David Markham held a press conference urging the transfer of the murder investigation of Caitlin to the Butler County Sheriff's Office. Markham requested the Butler County Sheriff Richard Jones to lead the investigation, but Jones decided to collaborate with the city police instead of taking it over completely. On August 16th, on what would have been Markham's 27th birthday, her family and friends came together at the Springfield Cinema Deluxe for the premiere of a documentary called Taken Too Soon, The Caitlin Markham Story. It was directed by Michael Crisp. They hoped that the documentary would provide further insights into the details surrounding her death. We want people to get to know her instead of just getting to know the face that was on all of these missing posters. This heightened the people's interest in the Caitlin Markham case, and they asked the police for answers. On November 15, 2016, the police took notice of another murder in Fairfield itself. Back in February 2014, 15-year-old Chelsea Jones was stabbed to death. At that time, the police thought they caught the killer. But on trial, the killer was released due to a lack of evidence. Now, police were wondering whether Caitlin had been murdered by the same person who killed Chelsea. But again, the police did not arrest the person of interest due to a lack of evidence. The investigation continued, but it was leading nowhere. However, the police did not announce the case to be closed, so the case never officially went cold. In the month of July 2019, 23-year-old Ellie Week went missing in Fairfield, and the police asked everyone to come in and help. But on August 24, 2019, Week's body was found. It was similar to what had happened in Caitlin's case. The police arrested a suspect known to be Michael Strauss. After hearing this information, David Markham went on August 28, 2019. The police did a 10-minute press conference just to say that there was no connection between the two cases. And Caitlin's case was once again put on the back burner. However, Michael Strauss was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison. On January 23, 2020, the Butler County Prosecutor's Office chose Michael Teague-Moser as the lead investigator in the ongoing investigation. On August 18, 2020, the authorities took a drive from the illegal dumping site to Caitlin's townhome. They found two main routes to reach there. They also found that John Carter's father owned some properties around that area. There's a specific site called Kokomo Hill where the Carters owned property. The Big Cedar Road where Caitlin's remains were found fell in between Carter's home and Kokomo Hill. Carter had previously revealed that Caitlin sometimes went to parties at Kokomo Hill, where she used to hang out with Carter and his friends, specifically a friend named Jonathan Pomerton. Surprisingly, it was on August 18th itself that the authorities also found black-colored plastic sheets and landscaping materials at John Carter's residence. It seemed similar to the material in which Caitlin's remains were wrapped in. On October 8, 2020, the authority spoke to the president of Advanced Laminated Housing Structures, whose company built the Kokomo Hill property for the Carters. He compared both the materials and confirmed that while the materials found at Carter's home and the material used to wrap Caitlin's body were similar, they were not an exact match. But while interviewing different experts in the industry, Gamoser found that this material was not something that a homeowner would normally possess. It was usually something that industry professionals would use. This material was also very durable, which is why Caitlin's remains were found inside of it even after 20 months had passed. The material had even endured a water stream that flowed near the dumping site. On January 28, 2021, John Carter was called again to take the polygraph tests. The investigators concluded that his answers were again deceptive. He'd also given deceptive answers in his previous polygraph tests. On March 2022, the police interviewed two teenage boys separately. They were Caitlin's neighbors. On the night of Caitlin's disappearance, both the teenage boys had snuck out of their house to go to the Sacred Hearts Festival and witnessed two vehicles, including a red Ford Focus believed to be driven by John Carter, entering the driveway and the garage of the house. It was around 2 a.m. The cars had their lights off and they stayed in the garage briefly before leaving. This behavior raised suspicion, as intentionally driving without headlights is a red flag for law enforcement. The red Ford Focus, confirmed to belong to Carter through registration and his admission, was in the garage for about 5 to 15 minutes before heading out. On April 14, 2022, the police interviewed Jonathan Pomerton, who was a longtime friend of Carter's. He was also interviewed in 2011 and 2012. Both the interviews were compared, and the police found out that Pomerton had changed his statements and was being deceptive. On December 22, 2022, Moser interviewed a private investigator. Apparently, on August 16, 2011, 2 days after Caitlin's disappearance, Carter had called this private investigator and asked if she'd be interested in investigating the case. Carter had also asked her about the steps taken by the police in a murder investigation. The private investigator said that during their conversation, Carter talked about Caitlin in the past tense. This indicated that Carter already knew that Caitlin was dead, but her remains would not be found until 20 months after this conversation. From all these clues, it looked like the investigation was going in the right direction and Carter appeared to be a suspect. On February 17, 2023, the Butler County Common Police Court ordered a search warrant to search John Carter's mother's residence that he'd lived in until 2021. They found drawing of angels in the woods in his home, and also surreal poetries written about death. These poems were in reference to a loved one which they believed to be Caitlin Markham. It was on this day that the first arrest in the Caitlin Markham case was made. The police arrested Jonathan Pomerton on the counts of perjury as he lied to the investigators. Then, on March 22, 2023, the police arrested John Carter suspecting him to be involved in the disappearance of Caitlin Markham. Following the grand jury's indictment for the murder of Caitlin Markham, John Carter was captured on body camera footage as he was taken into custody. At first, he expressed willingness to speak with detectives, but later he changed his mind and requested a lawyer. Carter entered a plea of not guilty and was released on a $1 million bond. The prosecutor in the case revealed that several writings were discovered in John Carter's home addressing themes of love and death. One particular passage found stated, "Deep down, I love her. You want to kill her, but I love her. She must die." Another message was scribbled on a door saying, "I slit your wrists with the key to your heart." Caitlin Markham's father, Dave Markham, who'd waited a long time for this, thought that they were finally on the right track. "I've been let down too many times there to get too encouraged. It is a positive move. It is a good thing, but it's still not over. It's not solved." After the news of the arrest, David expressed his feelings about Caitlin and Carter's relationship. He said that Caitlin had desired to move to Colorado alone and had been feeling burdened by her partner. He added that she took on all the planning and expenses while Carter didn't save money or contribute. Frustrated and unhappy, she wanted to end the relationship due to the pain, trouble, and lack of commitment. The search warrant affidavit that was unsealed in late April 2023 revealed a great deal of information surrounding the case. It mentioned that there were claims stating that John Carter and another person, whose name was redacted, disposed of Caitlin Markham's body. The police were seeking a warrant to search his mother's house for black plastic or construction and landscaping sheeting, which they believed was used to wrap Caitlin's body. While finding such material was not definitive proof, it was significant evidence that aligned with the prosecution's case. However, it was important to consider that individual possession of the material didn't imply guilt in the murder case. When solving cases like this, which had been ongoing for almost 12 years, circumstantial evidence played a crucial role in putting together the puzzle and gaining a clearer understanding of what transpired. The affidavit also revealed that during the police interview conducted on the day Caitlin Markham was reported missing and the following day, police had observed red vertical scratches on John Carter's neck. He attributed them to shaving. However, the police said that it was really unlikely that an electric razor could have caused the scratches as Carter claimed. In addition to this, friends who were with Carter and Caitlin on the night before she disappeared stated they hadn't seen any scratches on him. Around the time of Caitlin Markham's disappearance, there were plans for her and Carter to move to Colorado, but it was believed that she was becoming less interested in their relationship and that things weren't going well between them. John's mother even offered to co-sign a credit card application for Caitlin if she agreed to take him to Colorado, but it seems she declined and didn't proceed with the application. This information provides insight into the dynamics between Caitlin and John at the time of her disappearance. According to her friends, Caitlin expressed feeling trapped, losing attraction towards John, and being concerned about his drug use and unconventional sexual desires. These details, among others, could help build a strong case against John Carter when he goes to trial. At this stage, John Carter maintains his innocence. He's been released on a $1 million bond and his trial is scheduled for June 2024. There may be upcoming court appearances for status hearings or related matters. It's not surprising to many that John Carter was later charged with Caitlin's murder, although some people were taken aback. It took 11.5 years for charges to be filed, which is disappointing as he had the freedom to carry on with his daily life while Caitlin was denied that opportunity. The evidence against him is substantial, and it's a relief that the suspicions were not unfounded. Do you think that John Carter will be found guilty? Or do you think that pieces of evidence against him are still not substantial enough for sentencing? On September 25, 1994, in the quiet town of Jonesboro, Georgia, Douglas Overstreet, a 37-year-old well-regarded police lieutenant vanished without a trace after a camping trip, leaving his loved ones and the community in a state of distress. The investigation took a startling twist when an unexpected passerby stumbled upon a lifeless body bearing the chilling signs of a heinous crime near Lake Thurmond. As detectives embarked on their search for answers, they uncovered a web of lies revealing a disturbing truth. Who was behind the gruesome act? What dark secrets led to this devastating outcome? This case takes us to Jonesboro, a charming suburban city in Clayton County, Georgia, located about 15 miles south of downtown Atlanta. With a rich history dating back to the early 1800s, Jonesboro has transformed into a dynamic community with a diverse population. It offers a blend of residential areas, commercial districts, and natural beauty. The city boasts numerous parks, cultural attractions, and local businesses, providing ample opportunities for recreation and entertainment. Despite this, however, the crime rate in Clayton County is about 50% higher than the U.S. average. It was also the setting of a heinous crime that took place in September 1994. Let's first go back to the beginning when Douglas Lee Overstreet entered this world on April 10, 1957. He grew up in northwest Atlanta in a working-class neighborhood, and all he ever wanted to do was be a police officer. He was the first child of Ewan Leroy Overstreet and Inez Brannon Overstreet, a family filled with love and adventure. In the Overstreet household, young Douglas had two younger siblings to share his journey with. Edith Overstreet, the youngest sibling, who was 10 years younger than Douglas, and Michael Overstreet, the middle son, who was 6 years younger than Douglas. Douglas Overstreet was known as Doug by those who knew him. At 37 years old, he held a prominent position as a lieutenant in the Atlanta Police Department, instilling a sense of safety and order within the community. People go into police work for different reasons. A lot of people just want to have the power to push people around. That was not Doug. Doug was there because he wanted to help people. In addition to his law enforcement duties, Doug embraced a part-time role as a security guard at the lively Rio Bravo bar in Buckhead. But there is more to Doug than his professional life. He was passionate about adventure, and whenever he had time, he used to venture into the wilderness, indulging in his passion for camping. Armed with a camera, he loved to capture the beauty of his surroundings as a precious memory. With his gentle and friendly nature, Doug made it a point to connect with his neighbors, often extending warm invitations for tea and heartfelt conversations. In the year 1984, Doug, at the age of 27, found love and companionship when he married Candace Overstreet, a 40-year-old woman who already had 2 daughters. Candace had 2 daughters from a previous marriage. They were small children when he and Candace got married, so Doug was pretty much the father figure in their life. Their blended family included Brandy Overstreet, the elder daughter at 21 years old, who preferred the comforts of home and had a more introverted nature. Keisha Overstreet, on the other hand, was a vibrant 19-year-old college student. Douglas cherished his role as a stepfather, forming strong bonds with both Brandy and Keisha. Whenever he returned home, he'd bring thoughtful gifts to show us affection and make them feel special. On September 25, 1994, Doug eagerly embarked on a solo trip. However, as evening approached, Doug had not yet made his way back as he was expected to return home by evening. As the hours ticked by and nightfall loomed, the growing unease settled upon the household, for there was no sign or communication from Doug. Growing increasingly worried, the family launched an extensive search, leaving no stone unturned in their efforts to find him. However, despite their best efforts, Doug remained elusive. It wasn't until 3 days later, on September 28, 1994, that his wife Candace reported him missing. An officer was sent to their residence in Jonesboro, Georgia, to speak with Candace and gather the complete account about Doug's disappearance. She went ahead and went to bed, and when she woke up the next morning, he wasn't there. By the afternoon, when he didn't show up, she started to worry. Candace informed the officer that Doug had embarked on a camping trip 3 days earlier, but there'd been no communication or updates since then. Big question was, well, where's Doug? She says, I don't know. We went to the Georgia Tech game on Saturday, and then, the last time that I saw him was when he was leaving that night. She contacted Doug's friends and employers, yet none of them had any information to share. However, the officer found it slightly peculiar that Candace had waited for 3 days before reporting Doug's disappearance. On Monday, the 26th, and maybe Tuesday, the 27th, it was, I would say, more concern and worry and curiosity. But then by Wednesday, she was getting angry because I think she believed she ran off with a woman. Typically, spouses would promptly reach out to authorities either on the same night or at least by the following morning, expressing concern for their missing partners. Intrigued by this aspect, the officer gently inquired about the nature of their relationship, hoping to uncover any potential underlying factors that might shed light on the unusual delay. But according to Candace, their marriage was nothing short of perfect and Doug had a strong bond with his stepdaughters. However, she revealed that Douglas had been facing challenges in his professional life, such as being overlooked for a promotion and being caught up in the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, inquiry involving his unit. He had been up for a promotion, and I don't think he had gotten the promotion, and he was struggling with whether he should leave the department or stay. Candace expressed her fear that these difficulties might have driven Doug to contemplate taking his own life, leaving investigators with a haunting possibility to consider. I believe some of the officers thought that there was a chance he might have taken his own life. Oh God, you don't think he would have done something, do you? I don't know what to think. Investigators wasted no time in launching their investigation and started with interviewing the neighbors. They were hoping to uncover any hints of unusual activity or a glimpse of something out of the ordinary that they would have noticed on that fateful September day in 1994. There's not a lot that you can do proactively other than posting the lookout of Doug and his vehicle. However, despite their efforts, the neighbors appeared as clueless as the investigators themselves and were unable to shed any light on the mysterious events of that day. The police left no stone unturned in their search for Doug as they meticulously scoured every place he was known to visit and also issued an all-points bulletin for his truck. Given his position as the head of the burglary unit, investigators didn't ignore the possibility that he might have made enemies. However, as they delved into his files and investigated his past, nothing much emerged to indicate that he'd become a target of anyone's revenge. The absence of any glaring clues or motives only deepened the mystery surrounding Doug's disappearance. After 2 days, on September 30th, 1994, Doug's truck was discovered in the long-term parking of the bustling Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. The vehicle of a missing Atlanta police officer was found today in the long-term parking at Hartsfield Airport. The truck was in long-term parking at the Atlanta airport. Atlanta police had found it out there. The authorities promptly photographed the truck at the airport before carefully transporting it to a secure warehouse. I said, you know, they found his truck at the airport. We heard that on the news. And I said, maybe he just got on a plane. And I kept trying to just run through scenarios of where could he possibly have gone. When the truck was found at the airport, that kind of confirmed the suspicions that he had taken off. Inside, they meticulously combed through every inch, searching for any potential clues that could shed light on Doug's whereabouts. As they adjusted for fingerprints and examined the vehicle for other evidence, the fingerprints they discovered belonged not to an unknown suspect, but to Doug's own family members. However, the presence of the fingerprints from the family on their house vehicle was not unusual, and they dismissed any possibility of them being involved. At this point, the FBI stepped in to lend their expertise to the case. A detective from the Clayton County Police Department revealed that the involvement of the FBI brought a new level of resources and capabilities to the search for answers. With the discovery of Doug's truck at the airport, law enforcement began considering the possibility that he might have taken a flight either willingly or under pressure. She follows him all over the top place. She calls him all the time. She shows up at his off-duty work and that he may have just been fed up and just disappeared. Missing persons cases are difficult in that respect because it can be anything and it could be nothing. On October 1st, 1994, the investigation took another shocking turn when a passerby stumbled upon the lifeless body of a naked man in Lake Thurmond near the Georgia-South Carolina border. The police reported the grim details of the scene and that the victim had been mercilessly shot. It appeared that the body had been in the water a couple of days. There were 15 gunshot wounds. It wasn't just a killing. It was a very vicious killing. Whoever did this was full of anger. The Atlanta team working on Doug's case swiftly made their way to South Carolina. Using fingerprints, they confirmed the devastating truth. The body belonged to none other than Douglas Overstreet. Detectives began their homicide investigation by focusing on the placement and number of gunshot wounds on Doug's body. It wasn't just your normal person shot 1 or 2 times. This person shot multiple times. It was almost like an angry criminal that he'd put in prison, or maybe a family member of a criminal that he'd put in prison. This isn't just somebody, going off on a lark. This is serious. Surprisingly, it was revealed that at least 4 of the wounds were concentrated near his inner thigh, which hinted towards a deeply personal and potentially sinister motive behind the tragic event. When the police informed Candace about Doug's tragic death, that's when something strange happened. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Overstreet. We're here to talk to you about your husband." And we told Candace that we had found Doug. Her facial expressions gradually changed as she seemed nervous, like any of her wrong deeds had finally been caught. She pretended to be distraught and showed signs of being distressed. However, the investigators noticed the sudden change in her expression and started questioning about more information about Doug and his relations. That's when her story started to unravel. Initially, she portrayed their marriage as perfect, but later, she changed her tune. She admitted to suspecting Doug of having an affair, implying that their seemingly flawless relationship had hidden cracks. So was there a particular event that led you to believe that Doug might have run off with another woman? These revelations prompted detectives to dig more into this complex web of secrets and into the true nature of Doug and Candace's marriage and its potential relevance to his untimely demise. As the investigation progressed, police discovered some evidence which indicated that Doug might have been involved in a relationship with a woman he met while working at Rio Bravo, but no further information was revealed about the woman by police. Seemed like they knew each other from before, but maybe she recognized him from here. Doug's been working here every Friday and Saturday night for the past 7 years. Doug's co-workers confirmed to investigators that Candace was aware of his social activities, like his networking events and what he used to do whenever he was out and to whom he met. He was really one of those guys that probably shouldn't have been a police officer because he never got violent even in places the other officers have said. Everybody would have reacted violently as a police officer. Always calm, cool, and collected. Just an all-around good man. However, despite pursuing this lead, authorities were unable to identify any new suspects in connection with the case. On October 2, 1994, the medical report from Doug's autopsy was also released. In it, some startling findings emerged, revealing that not one, but 2 different firearms had been used in a shooting. The autopsy report identified the weapons as a 9mm and a 38mm pistol. Police again contacted Candace at her home to see if she could uncover any new insights into the case. To their surprise, Candace revealed that Doug had expensive habits such as enjoying fine dining experiences and traveling frequently and had accumulated debt. But she had no knowledge of the source of the loans. "His mother would call me," she said. "Doug's getting a lot of return checks. You could tell by the envelope what they were, and he would get as many as 6 in one day." Detectives questioned why she hadn't disclosed this crucial information earlier, to which Candace explained that she didn't want to tarnish Doug's reputation by discussing his financial troubles. Investigators even looked into Doug's financial records, hoping to uncover any possible links to his mysterious fate. Doug had borrowed money from friends and not repaid, and his salary was being garnished. According to Frederick, Douglas's friends claimed that he'd borrowed money in order to appease his wife. However, despite all the leads, investigators couldn't establish a direct connection between his financial struggles and his untimely demise. Clear paper trail. Every interaction they ever had was Doug. There's nothing shady about it. Now it was really frustrating for the investigators to continue their investigation without any definite lead. 3 days after the discovery of Doug's lifeless body, on October 4, 1994, detectives made a condolence call to Candace. During their conversation, she casually mentioned that she'd be burying Doug's body with his badge which she'd retrieved from Doug's cupboard. This seemingly casual remark instantly set off alarm bells among the investigators, as police officers rarely leave their homes without their badges. And we are going to bury him with the badge. We are unable to locate any of his belongings. So we don't have his badge. Well, I have his badge. It's right upstairs. Suddenly, all the puzzling pieces of the case started falling into place. The contradictory statements from Candace, the fingerprints found on Doug's vehicle, and her overall suspicious behavior from the start. He would have that. He wouldn't have left that. If you have a badge, you do not leave home without it. The spotlight now turned towards Candace as the mounting evidence began to point a serious finger in her direction. Without wasting any time, and sought permission from Candace to conduct a thorough search as part of their investigation. Miss Overstreet, do you mind if I check out the rest of the house? See if I can find anything that may help with the investigation? Oh sure, go ahead. As they stepped into the couple's bedroom, a startling revelation awaited them. It seemed as though Doug's existence had been erased from the room. All his belongings were suspiciously absent. There was no men's clothes, no underwear, no t-shirts. People just don't take their loved ones' clothes. Get rid of them that soon after something happens. The investigators' attention then turned to the carpet, which appeared to have been disturbed. It's all really nice and neat. It's got brand new carpet on the floor. And step on something. To their surprise, they discovered blood stains on the exposed subflooring, raising even more troubling questions about the events that had unfolded within those walls. I walked back downstairs, and I just pulled Captain Reynolds over to the side. And I said, Captain, I found a couple things up here. I think there's something's happened in this house. However, the police left the residence without disclosing their discoveries to Candace and decided to exercise restraint as not to alert her. The next day, on October 5, 1994, they obtained a search warrant. Upon their return, a more detailed examination uncovered substantial and noteworthy blood stains, not only under the carpet, but in the whole house. Obvious tampering had occurred in that bedroom, with a new carpet being laid that wasn't tacked to the floor. We tore the carpet up, removed a piece of wood, and saw a large blood pattern. The extent of these stains left no room for doubt. Further, the investigators stumbled upon 2 bullets which were concealed beneath the bedroom flooring, solidifying their evidence that Doug had met a violent end there at the house. By employing luminol, a substance that detects the presence of blood, they made another startling discovery: a lengthy blood trail which was leading from the bedroom to the basement. Their investigation took an even more chilling turn when they examined Candace's van, where they uncovered even more bloodstains suspected to have come from Doug. Based on their investigation, the police concluded that Doug had been shot inside the bedroom and subsequently dragged through the house before being placed into the van. Considering his sizable stature at 220 pounds, it was evident that the task of moving him would have required the involvement of at least 2 individuals. Doug's a big guy. He's well over 200 pounds. And then they've got to get rid of his body. In light of these findings, the authorities made the decision to bring in Candace and Brandy, Doug's stepdaughter, to the police department for further questioning. It's time we get some answers, don't you think? Kisha was not suspected, as she was away with her friends on that fateful day, which her friends corroborated. Upon reaching the police station, Candace chose to remain silent and declined to engage with the authorities. I'm pleading a fifth. Really? It's all you have to say. Meanwhile, in a separate room, Brandy was kept unaware of her mother's decision. The police strategically informed Brandy that her mother had confessed to the crime. You interview this defendant and you interview that defendant, and then you learn stuff from this defendant, then you can ask this defendant about, and vice versa. Believing this information to be true, Brandy found herself compelled to share her side of the story with the investigators. She's ready to talk. This is weighing on her. We already know what happened in the house, Brandy. So it's time to come clean, Brandy. According to Brandy, her mother had awoken her in the morning of September 25, 1994, and revealed that she'd shot Doug during a heated argument. She just laid in the bed and waited and waited. And finally, what seemed like a long time later, her mother came to her door. Brandy, get up. Need you in my room. Shockingly, Candace had even sought Brandy's assistance in moving Doug's lifeless body and driving it to the nearby lake, which was Lake Thurmond. According to investigators, Brandy also revealed a startling confession from Candace. She disclosed that her mother had not only confessed to shooting Doug, but also admitted to using 2 different weapons in the act. In an attempt to dispose of the evidence, Candace had allegedly thrown the guns into a nearby river. She'd go over a bridge and throw one gun in, and they'd drive a little bit farther, throw the next one in over another bridge into the water. To further complicate matters and mislead the investigators, Candace devised a plan. She drove Doug's truck to the airport with Brandy following closely behind in her own car. After their return home, they carefully cleaned up all the blood stains, leaving behind no trace of the gruesome event. Justice finally caught up with Candace Overstreet on December 21, 1994, when she was officially charged with 2 counts of felony murder. The motive behind the shocking crime remained shrouded in mystery, as Candace chose to keep it hidden from the world. However, her daughter Brandy played a crucial role in the case. In exchange for her testimony against her own mother, Brandy was granted immunity, a decision that helped bring closure to the investigation. Even after the final decision, the defense team for Candace Overstreet planned to present a shocking claim that Doug had been assaulting his stepdaughters. However, prosecutors thoroughly investigated these allegations and found no evidence to support such claims. From the very beginning of the investigation and through interviews with the stepdaughters, it was clear that Doug had been a loving and caring father figure. In order to protect Doug's reputation and preserve his memory, the prosecutors made a difficult decision. They allowed Candace to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter instead. She received a 40-year prison sentence with a scheduled release date in 2034. However, unexpected news broke on December 1, 2020, when it was revealed that Candace had been granted parole. This incident once again captured public interest in 2022 as Investigation Discovery, ID, a renowned true crime network, decided to shine a spotlight on it. This particular case stands out not only for its shocking nature but also for the unsettling involvement of family members. The recent arrival of an ID production crew in Jonesboro sparked curiosity, indicating that the network is preparing to delve deeper into the details of this tragic incident for an upcoming true crime program. This intriguing true crime story serves as a reminder of the dark secrets that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly idyllic lives. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you think Candace deserved to be paroled? What could be the possible motive behind killing Doug Overstreet? We'd love to hear from you. If there's a case you'd like us to cover, don't hesitate to drop your recommendations in the comments section below. On June 14, 2021, a courtroom in Los Angeles, California was filled with silence as an elderly defendant was wheeled in on a wheelchair looking weak and fragile. Despite his frail appearance, the accusations against him were grave. This man was accused of committing horrifying crimes over many years, allegedly murdering multiple people. Prosecutors claimed that his wealth and influential status had allowed him to escape justice for a long time. However, now he was finally facing the charges, even though he was already close to death. It raises an important question. What serious crimes did he commit that led him to face the consequences until his last breath? Robert Durst, a native of New York City, was born on April 12, 1943. Growing up in Scarsdale, he was part of the prominent Durst family, known for their real estate empire. His father, Seymour Durst, was a well-known real estate magnate, and his mother, Bernice Herstein, played a significant role in their family's life. Alongside his 3 younger siblings, Douglas, Tommy, and Wendy, Robert experienced typical sibling rivalry with Douglas, which led them to attend counseling sessions. Interestingly, a psychiatrist report of 10-year-old Robert from 1953 mentioned intriguing phrases like personality decomposition and the potential of even schizophrenia, which is a mental disorder characterized by disconnection from reality, including hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking and behavior. Robert attended Scarsdale High School, where he was known to be a loner among his classmates. After graduating, he pursued a bachelor's degree in economics at Lehigh University, where he actively participated in the varsity lacrosse team and served as the business manager for the student newspaper, The Brown and White. In 1965, he completed his undergraduate studies. Following that, he ventured onto a doctoral program at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. During his time there, he met Susan Berman, who happened to be the daughter of a mobster. She was an aspiring writer who quickly became his close friend. However, Robert made the decision to withdraw from the program and return to New York in 1969. In autumn of 1971, Robert Durst crossed paths with Kathleen "Kathy" McCormick, an 18-year-old dental hygienist residing in one of the buildings in New York owned by the Durst organization. They first met when Robert went to collect the rent. Kathy, a recent high school graduate who came from a lower-middle-class modest Irish family on Long Island, had just arrived in New York City. With her sparkling beauty and strong work ethic, Kathy captivated Robert from the start. Despite Robert's reserved demeanor, Kathy found him to be a sweet and sensitive person. In the early 1970s, Robert arrived in Vermont and ventured into the health food business and opened a store called All Good Things in Vermont. Surprisingly, after only 2 dates, Robert invited Kathy to move in with them in his home near the store. A year later, on his 30th birthday on April 12, 1973, the two decided to get married. My very first impression of Kathy and Bobby when I met them was that they were in love. There was no two ways about it, they were in love. Their marriage started off as a loving one. Despite their significant age difference of 10 years, and coming from contrasting backgrounds, Robert and Kelly found themselves entangled in a relationship. Robert, accustomed to wealth and privilege, and Kathy, hailing from an Irish Catholic family, seemed to be from two different worlds. However, Kathy was captivated by the allure and lifestyle that came with being associated with the Durst name. In 1973, under pressure from his father, Robert decided to close his health food store and used the money to purchase a cottage near New York City in South Salem. He moved in with Kathy in the house he bought, but that's when their relationship took a noticeable turn. Kathy witnessed a significant change in Robert's behavior as he transformed into a completely different person from the man she'd fallen in love with in Vermont. These experiences with her family were kind of like Bob meets the average American family. Well, more than meet, Bob is forced to spend time with the average American family. Bob is supposed to be polite and cooperative and pleasant and engage in the same conversations that they are, and I just couldn't do that. As we're going back in the car, Kathy is crying and saying, "They're all good people. They treated us with utmost respect. You can just put up with it for 2 hours. Did you say I'll try?" I wouldn't talk about it. Initially, Robert enjoyed showcasing Kathy at high-profile events and introducing her to his glamorous world. However, over time, Robert's affection towards Kathy grew colder, and she found herself in an increasingly miserable situation. Kathy occasionally hinted at Robert's anger issues to her friends, saying how it started with yelling and eventually escalated to physical abuse. Over time, these hints escalated into unmistakable signs of a profoundly troubled relationship. I was the dominant one in the relationship. I was making all the decisions, calling all the shots, as she would say. And, she went along with that for a while, and then she just got tired. Kathy had kept several diaries where she documented the hardships she endured in their marriage. Despite being a wealthy millionaire, Robert was excessively frugal and closely monitored Kathy's spending. People wondered why Kathy, a socialite married to a millionaire, was working so hard to become a doctor in medical school. She jokingly explained that it was her own choice and that she wanted to establish a career for herself. The reality was that becoming a doctor would provide her with financial independence, allowing her to have control over her own money and to spend or save it as needed. As the marriage progressed, Robert delivered a shocking blow to Kathy. He revealed that he had no desire to have children. This revelation left Kathy heartbroken, and she channeled her sadness into her studies. However, their relationship suffered a deep fracture that could never quite heal. In 1976, Kathy found herself pregnant, which triggered Durst's fury. He accused her of intentionally becoming pregnant and demanded that she undergo an abortion. With threats of divorce hanging over her, Kathy reluctantly went through with the procedure. Little did she know that this heartbreaking decision would send her spiraling into a whirlwind of grief and despair. Kathy first started changing from the Kathy I met when I made her get an abortion. February of '76, I found out I was pregnant. We used birth control and had at one time said that if I was to become pregnant, I would have an abortion. The reality of the situation, however, was problematic for me. I said I told you from the beginning I didn't want children. You agreed that we wouldn't have children. Now you're telling me you're pregnant, which, you're in charge of that stuff, not me, and you want to keep the baby. Well, you keep the baby, you're gonna get divorced from me. Period. I mean, you sound like you were pretty adamant about it. In my eye was during that time, Kathy made a shocking discovery. She found hidden Polaroid pictures of their medicine cabinets and closets. When confronted, Durst admitted to bringing other women into their home, rearranging things to show that he lived alone, and using the photos to again place the things back where they'd been to cover his tracks. This revelation deepened the rift in their relationship, with Kathy bearing the brunt of the suffering alone. In the early months of 1982, 29-year-old Kathy was near the end of her medical studies at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, pursuing her dream of becoming a pediatrician. However, this was also a time filled with turmoil and pain. She sought medical attention for the visible bruises on her face and sought treatment at a Bronx hospital. She also revealed to a trusted friend that these injuries were inflicted by Durst, her husband, when she confronted him about his affair with Prudence Farrow, a well-known transcendental meditation guru and the sister of actress Mia Farrow, who inspired the song, Dear Prudence. The combination of the demanding pressures of medical school and the constant cycle of physical and emotional abuse took a heavy toll on Kathy. She turned to excessive drinking and drugs as a means of coping with the pain. She barely slept or ate, and her friends noticed that her once vibrant and lively demeanor faded away, leaving her detached and anxious. Kathy finally realized that her marriage was beyond repair and decided to ask Robert for an official divorce in January 1982. She knew that her wealthy and violent husband would do anything to protect his money. Kathy offered him a fair settlement of $250,000, but Robert refused. In retaliation, he canceled several of her bank accounts and credit cards and also threatened to ruin her financially. This would have jeopardized Kathy's dreams of completing medical school just months away from graduation. Faced with these challenges, Kathy had to back down, and they continued with their unhappy arrangement. It became clear that Robert was more interested in controlling Kathy than anything else. Kathy only needed to endure a little longer before she could finally escape from Robert's abuse forever. Sadly, Kathy would never have the chance to reach that moment. On the evening of January 31, 1982, Kathy attended a party hosted by her friend Gilberto Najami. She appeared disheveled and was not acting like her usual self. Instead of her usual stylish attire, Kathy wore something casual and seemed visibly upset. Later that night, Robert called Najami's house looking for Kathy. After a brief phone conversation, Kathy announced that she was leaving. Before walking out the door, she turned to Najami and made a chilling statement. She asked Najami to promise that if anything ever happened to her, she'd make sure her husband Robert was investigated. Najami didn't fully understand the seriousness of Kathy's words at the time, but promised Kathy that her request would be fulfilled. Kathy got into her car and drove away, and it would be the last time Najami saw her. The next day, on February 1, 1982, when Kathy failed to meet Najami at a pub called the Lionsgate in Manhattan as planned, Najami grew concerned. This was highly unusual behavior for Kathy, so Najami began reaching out to their mutual friends to see if anyone had heard from her. Najami also called Robert, but he claimed he hadn't seen Kathy since the night of the party and was trying to contact her himself. After a few days went by without any news from Kathy, on February 5, 1982, Robert decided to go to the New York Police Department and reported her as missing. Detective Michael Strazak was the one who listened to Robert's report and talked to him about it. According to Robert, things got heated between him and Kathy that night on January 31, 1982, and she insisted on going to their Manhattan apartment instead of staying with them at the house. In a huff, Robert drove her to the Catona train station, where she planned to catch the 9:15 p.m. train to Manhattan. The detectives found it strange that Robert had waited so long before reporting his wife missing. When they questioned him about it, he remained surprisingly calm and explained that Kathy often spent days away from home due to her work and studies at the hospital. He didn't seem bothered at all by her absence. What made things even more peculiar was that he quickly went to the press and offered a reward of $100,000 for any information that could help find Kathy. Later on, He said there was a mistake in the original article and reduced the reward amount to $15,000 because Robert was well known. Both his wife's disappearance and his own actions gained a lot of attention from the media. At this point, Robert's longtime friend Susan Berman stepped in and became his unofficial spokesperson. She made statements and answered questions on his behalf. During the initial investigation, both the doorman and the building superintendent at Kathy's apartment on Riverside Drive in Manhattan claimed to have seen Kathy there on February 1, 1982, the day after she was last seen. However, the doorman admitted that he only saw her from a distance and from behind, so he couldn't be sure it was her. Also, the dean from her college confirmed that on February 1, 1982, Kathy had called him to inform him she was sick and was having gastric problem, so she wouldn't be able to attend classes for a few days. What made things even more mysterious was that only 3 weeks after Robert reported Kathy missing, the building's superintendent discovered her belongings in the building's trash compactor. Kathy's friends couldn't sit still and wait any longer, so they took matters into their own hands. In March 1982, they broke into Kathy and Robert's South Salem home, hoping to find any sign of her or any clue about where she might be. But what they found was shocking. The house was a complete mess, as if it had been turned upside down. Kathy's mail had been torn open, and her belongings were carelessly thrown into the garbage. Her clothes, medical school books, and even her jewelry had been discarded. I went through his garbage, and I found that he was throwing her things out right away. Well, within 5 weeks at least of her disappearance. He knew she wasn't coming back. As they continued their search, they stumbled upon an itinerary that seemed to be written by Robert himself. This discovery added another layer of intrigue to the already puzzling situation. In the itinerary, Robert provided a detailed account of everything he did on the night Kathy went missing and the following days. I had a small trash can by the bed, and I went in, picked it out, and there it was. I said, "Oh boy, that just sent chills down my spine." The handwritten note contains the words town dump, bridge, dig, boat, and what Robert Durst has admitted was his own handwriting. It sounded like a wish list of what you do with the body to me. So what did you do with this letter once you found it? They made it to the police. They didn't want it. Didn't want it. They did not want it. A friend shared this information with the lead detective working on the case, who found it unusual because innocent people typically don't feel the need to write down such a precise and minute-by-minute recounting of their activities. While the New York police investigated leads and questioned Robert, it didn't remain unnoticed that higher-ranking officials were not pushing hard to solve the case. The investigation, which had only been going on for a few weeks, had already started to slow down. Usually, high-profile cases like this attract significant attention and pressure on the detectives, but that wasn't happening in this case. It seemed that the Durst family showed little concern about Kathy's disappearance and didn't cooperate with law enforcement. Robert himself refused interviews with the police, polygraph tests, and even answering basic questions, although he did give several interviews to reporters. Initially, Robert appeared to be a concerned and sympathetic husband, but his attitude soon changed to annoyance and he began to speak negatively about Kathy. He told the press that he thought Kathy had left him and was planning to run away with another man. Unfortunately, there was already limited evidence in Kathy's disappearance, and it seemed like the available evidence was ignored by law enforcement, possibly due to Robert's wealth and influence. As a result, despite the initial attention and urgency, the case quickly went cold and Kathy's disappearance became just another file in a storage locker for unsolved cases. After Kathy's disappearance, Robert distanced himself from New York and maintained a small circle of friends, primarily including Susan Berman and a few others. Between 1990 and February, Robert attempted to start fresh. He sold the house he shared with Kathy in South Salem, and without Kathy's family knowing, he filed for divorce on the grounds of spousal abandonment. Despite being next in line to take over his father's company, his father Seymour appointed his younger brother Douglas to the position in 1994. This caused Robert to accuse his brother stealing the company from him, leading to a rift within the family. In 1999, 17 years after her disappearance, the New York police quietly reopened Kathy's missing persons case after new detectives discovered significant mistakes made during the initial investigation. Their first suspicion was towards Robert. After this, They obtained a search warrant and searched Robert's former South Salem home and the nearby Truesdale Lake. But to their disappointment, they found nothing. It was during this period that Susan Berman, Robert's closest friend, found herself in a difficult financial situation. She was on the verge of being evicted from her home and had no money left. Desperate for help, she tried to reach out to Robert, but couldn't get through to him directly. Instead, she left a voicemail on a phone number he maintained. Several months later, in August 2000, a surprising gift arrived from Robert. He sent her 2 checks, each worth $25,000, which Susan used to pay off her debts. Little did they know, this act of generosity would be the catalyst for a series of unexpected events that were about to unfold. In December 2000, Susan Berman was living by herself in Benedict Canyon, Los Angeles. She worked as a journalist and author and had a fascinating background to share. Susan wrote about her family connections to reputed gangsters, especially her father, David "Davy" Berman, who was a mob boss in Las Vegas. When Susan was only 12, her father died on the operating table. He was in the hospital for routine surgery, and this was a huge blow to Susan. And it really marked her for the rest of her life. Susan and Robert quickly became close friends after meeting his students at UCLA when Susan was 22 years old. They shared a bond through their traumatic experiences. Susan's father died during surgery, and her mother passed away from a drug overdose. Similarly, Robert believed his mother had taken her own life jumping off the roof of their home. Susan saw Robert as the younger brother she never had and became very protective of him. When Susan got married in 1984, it was Robert who walked her down the aisle. When Kathy went missing, Susan took on the role of Robert's unofficial spokesperson, relaying his statements to the public. She also served as his alibi for the night Kathy disappeared. In September 2000, the Westchester District Attorney, Janine Porto, contacted Susan and informed her that they were about to reopen the Kathy Durst case after 18 years. Knowing Susan's close friendship with Robert and her role as his alibi during Kathy's disappearance, the district attorney believed she might be withholding crucial information that could help solve the case. Since Susan had never been interviewed during the initial investigation, the interview was scheduled to take place early in the new year. Surprisingly, the news of the district attorney's intention to interview Susan made headlines in New York. On December 19, 2000, Susan spoke with her friend, actress Kim Langford, and hinted at having an extraordinary story and vital information that would shake things up. Unfortunately, the day to reveal that information never came. On December 24, 2000, police found Susan Berman's lifeless body lying on the floor in a back bedroom of her house, which was located at 1527 Benedict Canyon Drive in Beverly Hills. She'd been shot at close range with a single 9mm bullet, hitting the back of her head, suggesting an execution-style killing. The police initially suspected that Susan's loose association with organized crime, given her father's notorious reputation as a mobster, may have played a role in her murder. Susan had openly discussed her family ties and even started writing about them, which may have drawn unwanted attention from certain individuals. The manner of her death, resembling a mafia-style execution with a single shot to the back of the head, seemed to support this theory. However, just a few days into the investigation, this theory was discarded as the Beverly Hills Police Department received an anonymous letter. The letter was written in block letters, and interestingly, the word Beverly was misspelled. Inside the envelope was a white piece of paper with Susan's address written on it and the word cadaver written below. What puzzled the investigators was that the letter had been sent on December 23, 2000, before the news of Susan's murder became public. This was unusual because a mobster would not typically send a letter to the police revealing the location of a body. It suggested that the person responsible for her death may have had a connection to her and cared enough to ensure her body was not left undiscovered and decomposed. Despite thorough examination, no fingerprints or saliva were found on the letter. Nonetheless, the act of sending the letter strongly suggested that the crime was not related to organized crime. That's when Susan's friend Linda Ops came forward and revealed that Susan had a close relationship with Robert Durst. It was also discovered that Susan was scheduled to have an interview with District Attorney Janine Pirro regarding the disappearance of Robert's wife Kathy in the new year. The police found it strange that Susan was murdered just before the interview, raising suspicions about the timing and possible connections between the two events. They wondered if Susan possessed information that could have unveiled hidden mysteries. The police fell deeper into Robert Durst's activities and discovered something suspicious. They learned that he'd been in California on December 19, 2000 and had departed on a late-night flight from San Francisco to New York on December 23, 2000, the day before Susan's body was discovered. This raised questions about why he was in San Francisco. Determined to uncover the truth, the police contacted Robert Durst for an interview. Initially, he refused to give any statements, but eventually, he had no choice but to agree. The police asked him about his travels, his connection to Susan's murder, and listened to his side of the story in their pursuit of the real truth. "We know that you flew out here, San Francisco, on December 19th. I think, Bob, that you drove down to Los Angeles. Killed Susan?" "I do. Go back? You don't take red-eye flights very often. Did you know that?" "Very infrequently. And usually you don't buy your tickets right at the counter. Would you agree? Usually I make reservations, right? On December 23rd, you end up buying that ticket at 10 at night at the counter in San Francisco. Just doesn't make sense." Yeah. I hear you. I'm just not going to be able to answer that because I just don't. Okay. Hard. It's like unusual. Despite the interview with Robert Durst, the police were unable to gather enough solid evidence to connect him to Susan's murder. Robert didn't provide any information during the interview that could lead the police to solve the case. Without concrete proof, the authorities had no choice but to release Robert Durst. The investigation into Susan's murder hit a roadblock, leaving the police frustrated and searching for new leads to unravel the mystery. Robert decided to leave New York when he learned that Kathy's case was going to be reopened. He wanted to avoid any further questioning and investigations into the case. In April 2001, he found refuge in Galveston, Texas, where he rented a modest apartment for a mere $300 per month. However, fate had more surprises in store for him. Another unfortunate event unfolded, adding yet another twist to the already mysterious tale. On September 30, 2001, the police in Galveston, Texas received a call from concerned parents reporting that their child had seen a man's torso floating in the water off Channelview Drive while walking in an upper-middle-class neighborhood. The police quickly arrived at the scene and discovered a headless torso of a Caucasian man. As they searched the water, they found several black trash bags floating nearby which contained severed arms and legs, but the head was nowhere to be found. Through fingerprints taken from one of the hands, the police identified the remains as belonging to a 71-year-old man named Morris Black. Morris lived in an apartment building on 2213 Avenue K and had no contact with his family. He'd arrived in Texas in the mid-1990s and had a previous arrest in 1998 for making threats about blowing up a utility company over an electricity bill issue. People who'd met Morris in Galveston described him as a grumpy old man who was suspicious of everyone. His nomadic lifestyle made it difficult to track his timeline of events over the years. The police obtained a search warrant for Morris' apartment and discovered that it had recently been thoroughly cleaned. In the kitchen, they noticed drop cloths covering the floor, and when they moved them, they found scratches on the floor that seemed to be made by a saw or another cutting tool. Removing the laminate, they uncovered large blood stains underneath. They spread a substance called luminol throughout the apartment, which revealed blood traces everywhere, including drag marks leading from Morris's apartment to the one across the hall. The apartment across the hall belonged to Dorothy Sinner, an elderly mute woman who kept to herself and was rarely seen. Investigators obtained a search warrant for Dorothy's apartment and found blood throughout the place. Unlike Morris's apartment, this one hadn't been cleaned and there were dried blood splatters all over. They also discovered a paring knife, a cleaver, a handsaw, and a pistol which was suspected to be the murder weapon. One of the bags recovered from the bay was empty and had a large rip, leading officers to believe that it might have contained Morris's missing head, as it was the only body part still unaccounted for. At this point, Dorothy Sinner was missing and the police focused on locating her. They discovered that Morris had likely been killed in Dorothy's apartment and dismembered in his own apartment. This raised a puzzling question. How could an elderly woman drag a man from one place to another and dismember him? Investigators spoke to residents of the avenue, and an upstairs neighbor revealed that she'd seen a man frequently visiting Dorothy's apartment. On the night of September 29, 2001, she witnessed this man carrying a heavy trash bag and putting it into a Honda CR-V. Additionally, when the police searched the garbage cans near the avenue, they found packaging for a 4-inch paring knife, a shell casing that could potentially belong to the pistol found in Dorothy's apartment, and a receipt from a local optometrist with Robert Durst's name on it. This discovery surprised the investigators as they wondered if Robert, along with Dorothy, was somehow connected to Morse's murder. To uncover the truth, the investigators checked the national database for information on Dorothy. On October 2, 2001, they were finally able to locate her. Surprisingly, she denied living in Galveston, Texas, and revealed that she was not mute. When asked about the second suspect, Robert, she admitted knowing him from their high school days in the 1950s. However, she hadn't spoken to him in decades and had no idea why an apartment was rented under her name. This raised suspicions about Robert's involvement in Morse's murder. On October 9, 2001, a Honda CR-V matching the description of the neighbor from Avenue K was discovered, and a search of the vehicle uncovered a saw and visible blood in the trunk. Finally, at 58 years old, for the first time, Robert Durst was arrested and charged with the murder of Morris Black. It was then revealed that to hide his true identity, he assumed the persona of Dorothy Steiner and pretended to be a mute woman using the name he borrowed from his former high school friend. During his time in Galveston, he was spotted wearing women's wigs and frequently visiting the library to search for articles about himself. He was held on a hefty bail amount of $300,000, which he easily paid and secured his release from custody. Surprisingly, he had no trouble paying this amount and was granted bail. However, instead of attending his court date on October 16, 2001, he quickly left Texas and went on the run. As a result, he was declared a fugitive by failing to appear in court as scheduled. After Robert became a fugitive, a search was initiated to find him. In the search for Robert Durst, a lawyer is asking him to surrender. Attorney Michael County made an appeal to him to turn himself in. "Robert, if you see this or hear this, please come home. You have loved ones who care about you here in New York. Your family is solidly, unifiedly behind you. The trust has the wherewithal to pay for your legal defense." On November 30, 2001, he was caught shoplifting at a Wegmans grocery store in Pennsylvania. When the police searched his vehicle, they discovered over $13,000 in cash, including nearly $600 in his pocket. They also found marijuana and a handgun. As a result, Robert faced charges for possessing the firearm and the shoplifting incident. He was extradited back to Texas to face more serious charges. And this time, he was held in custody without the option for bail. In January 2002, Robert Durst returned to Texas to face trial for the murder of Morris Black. During his testimony, Robert claimed that on September 28, 2001, he arrived home to find Morris in his apartment visibly angry. Even though Morse had a key to the apartment, Robert was not expecting him. Robert stated that he immediately suspected Morse of taking his stored pistol from the oven. And when he asked Morse about it, Morse allegedly stood up and pointed the gun at him. Robert asserted that in the struggle that ensued, he grabbed the pistol and both of them fell to the ground, resulting in the gun accidentally going off. Robert maintained that he never intentionally pulled the trigger, but the gunshot caused Morse's death. Robert claimed that after the incident, he tried to seek help from a neighbor, but nobody answered. So he returned to his apartment and began cleaning up the blood himself. He admitted to drinking a bottle of Jack Daniels and then proceeded to dismember Morse's body. He later disposed of the body parts by dumping them in the Galveston Bay. Robert explained that he did not go to the police because he believed they wouldn't believe his self-defense claim due to his past reputation and the suspicious circumstances. With the help of skilled defense attorneys, Robert's legal team presented evidence in court to support his case of acting in self-defense. Despite the substantial evidence, on November 11, 2003, Robert was found not guilty of Morris's death and was acquitted of the charges. The trial ended with a shocking outcome. Initially, Robert had to post a bail of $450,000 due to his past bail jumping and tampering with evidence. However, in October 2004, just as he was about to be released on parole, Pennsylvania authorities charged him with weapons possessions related to his time as a fugitive. He was released from federal prison in July 2005 and sent to Texas for parole. But Robert had trouble staying in one place. In December 2005, he was arrested for violating his parole by making unauthorized trips to Galveston. He was caught after visiting a Texas mall where he coincidentally encountered the judge who presided over his murder trial. In February 2006, Robert was released from prison and his parole supervision ended 9 months later. Once again, he became a free man. 4 years later, Robert's notorious actions became the subject of a movie called All Good Things, which was loosely based on his life. The film, starring Ryan Gosling and Kirsten Dunst, premiered in December 2010. It portrayed a man who killed his wife's best friend, neighbor, and dog. After watching the movie, Robert reached out to the director, Andrew Uretsky, and praised the film but expressed his dislike for the portrayal of the dog's murder. Robert and Andrew stayed in touch over the years, and despite his lawyer's advice against it, Robert eventually agreed to be interviewed for a documentary series about his life called The Jinx, The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst, which was produced by HBO. Did not tell the whole truth. Nobody tells the whole truth. Did you have anything to do with the death of your wife? I don't know that she's dead. Do you think that it's possible that she's alive now? It's possible. Not likely. I felt terrible for Susan. I was astonished that they were putting all this together, that I did it or I caused it to be done, or an interview is a big risk for you. Why do you want to do an interview? During the interview, Robert vehemently denied having any involvement in the murder of Susan or the disappearance of Kathy, firmly maintaining his innocence. Afterward, a series of interviews followed, leading to the creation of one of the most influential true crime documentary series, HBO's The Jinx, which was aired on February 2015. In this series, Andrew and his team carefully examined every aspect of Robert Durst's life, starting from his childhood to his marriage with Kathy and the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, as well as the murder of Susan Berman. The documentary also covered Robert's trial for the killing of Morris Black. As the documentary series progressed, an intriguing development unfolded. It began with Robert providing explanations for certain events that Andrew found suspicious. However, as the series continued, the doubts surrounding Robert grew stronger. The most significant revelation occurred during an interview with Sareb Kaufman, Susan Berman's stepson. Initially, Sareb staunchly defended Robert and believed he could never harm Susan. Even when presented with a clear motive for Robert's potential involvement, Sareb refused to entertain the possibility. However, weeks later in March 2015, Sareb's curiosity was piqued by his conversation with Andrew, prompting him to explore some old boxes containing Susan's belongings. To everyone's astonishment, including the production team, Sareb discovered a letter sent by Robert to Susan a few months before her death. The letter, a simple white envelope with block lettering, had the word Beverly misspelled. This finding significantly impacted the investigation into Susan's murder. During this entire time, both the Beverly Hills Police Department and the New York City Police were actively searching for leads in the cases of Susan Berman and Kathy Durst. When the crew of the Jinx contacted the Beverly Hills Police Department about the letter found by Sareb, it sparked alarm as it connected to the initial investigation into Susan's murder. This newfound evidence revitalized the investigators, prompting them to fly to New York and interview individuals close to Robert during the time of Susan's murder. These interviews provided police with additional evidence, leading to the filing of murder charges against Robert Durst. He was eventually located in a hotel in New Orleans along with a .38 caliber revolver, $40,000, a map of Cuba, a shoulder-to-head latex mask, and fake IDs and passport from which police understood that he was planning to fly to Cuba. He was arrested by the FBI in March 2015, just a few days before the highly anticipated finale of The Jinx aired on HBO. He's the infamous heir to one of the country's wealthiest real estate families, long suspected in connection with a pair of murders and a disappearance dating back decades. Tonight, Robert Durst is behind bars, arrested overnight in the lobby of a New Orleans hotel, accused of killing a female friend in Los Angeles 15 years ago. The investigation got a boost in recent weeks thanks to new evidence revealed in a documentary series that Durst willingly participated in. Law enforcement sources say they feared Durst, who was using a fake name, was a flight risk. The next morning after his arrest, Robert had a court hearing where he was held on bail until an extradition hearing. In November 2016, he was moved to the Los Angeles County Jail to await trial for the murder of Susan Berman. On March 2020, Robert appeared in court for the start of his trial, which was anticipated to last for several months. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the proceedings were postponed until May 17, 2021. On May 17, the jurors were asked if they could still be fair and impartial in the case despite the long break of 14 months. One juror was dismissed for not following the court's instructions to avoid following the trial in the news during the pandemic break. During a discussion about the content of the opening statements, the defense attorney, Dagger Rain, and the prosecutor, Lewin, got into a loud argument and had to be separated by another defense attorney, David Chesnoff. They were then scolded by the judge, Mark Wingham. On June 10, 2021, Robert Durst was found in a condition where he couldn't get up from the floor without help in prison. He was taken to the hospital and the judge decided to send the jury home until June 14. The prosecutor Lewin suspected that Robert might be pretending to be sick in order to cause a mistrial. Lewin mentioned that Robert had previously talked about faking dementia or using COVID-19 as a reason for a mistrial in his phone calls from jail. After the emergency hospital mistrial in his phone calls from jail. After the emergency hospitalization, doctors from the jail determined that Robert was able to appear in court. On June 14, 2021, the trial resumed and Robert, unable to dress himself, arrived in court in his wheelchair wearing a jail uniform and covered with a large blanket. It was during this time that he was questioned about the murders. On June 28, 2021, Robert's brother Douglas took the stand as a witness for the prosecution. On September 17, 2021, the jury found Robert guilty of first-degree murder in the case of Susan Berman. This meant he could potentially receive a life sentence. He was also convicted on multiple special charges. Robert's lawyers expressed disappointment with the verdict and stated they'd explore all available options for appeal. On September 24, Robert's legal team filed a motion requesting a new trial. Their arguments mirrored those presented during the original trial, claiming that there was no physical evidence, the credibility of prosecution witnesses were questionable, and the entire case relied on an unproven theory. On October 14, 2021, Robert received a life sentence in prison with no chance of parole for the murder of Susan Berman. The court denied Robert's request for a new trial as there is ample evidence that pointed to his guilt in the case. On January 10, 2022, at the age of 78, Robert passed away due to a heart attack at San Joaquin General Hospital in Stockton, California. He was undergoing medical tests at the time of his death. Robert was still under the custody of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation when he died. It's frustrating to know that Robert Durst lived a long life, reaching the age of 78. That's much longer than two of his victims, which is a heartbreaking thought. John Lewin, the prosecutor in Durst's trial, expressed his thoughts on the matter, saying that Durst remained hostile, unrepentant, and without remorse until the very end. It's a reminder of the pain and suffering his victims endured. His thoughts and sympathies lie with Robert's victims. From the unresolved disappearance of his first wife Kathy to the shocking murders of Susan Berman and Morse Black, Durst's story has been a chilling tale of deceit and violence. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you think Robert was really responsible for all the murders? Did he do it all on purpose? We'd love to hear from you. If there's a case you'd like us to cover, don't hesitate to drop your recommendations in the comments section below. January 4, 1964 was a Saturday, and 19-year-old Mary Sullivan was busy settling into her new apartment and still adjusting to Boston's lifestyle. She'd recently moved to the big city from her hometown of Cape Cod to pursue a college degree. But by the evening of that very same Saturday, something awful happened. However, it wasn't until dinner time when Mary's roommates returned from work and walked into her room only to find her cold, lifeless body. Who could have killed a kind-hearted girl like Mary? Was it done by someone Mary already knew? Or was there a killer on the loose? Boston, officially the city of Boston, is the capital and largest city of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and the cultural and financial center of the New England region of the northeastern United States. Boston is best known for its famous baked beans Fenway Park and the Boston Marathon. But this magnanimous city has its disadvantages as well. The violent crime rate in Boston is nearly double the national violent crime rate. People in Boston have a 1 out of 153 chance of becoming a victim of crime. While a majority of people stay alert and prepared in case of a mishap, that wasn't the case back in the 1960s. On January 4, 1964, Mary Sullivan met her gruesome end in the very same city of Boston. Mary Ann Sullivan was born on January 11, 1944, in a village called Hyannis in Barnstable County, Massachusetts, USA. Mary, along with her sister Diane Dodd and two brothers David Vincent Sullivan and John Michael Sullivan, was brought up by their parents Loretta Madden Sullivan and John Thomas Sullivan in the city of Cape Cod. During her teens, she was known to have an easygoing, sweet nature that was familiar to her friends and family. When Mary was a 19-year-old, she had already moved to Boston, Suffolk County, Massachusetts to pursue a career in an education. She got an apartment at Charles Street, Beacon Hill, with two roommates and was looking to work towards a college degree. But she was clueless about an awful tragedy she was about to become the victim of. It was on January 4, 1964, just a little after sundown, when the skies were turning darker by the minute, Mary's roommates returned home from Fillings, their workplace. As they walked into the apartment, they saw Mary asleep on her bed and decided to let her sleep. But little did they know, a horrendous crime that would soon become the talk of the town had taken place in their very own apartment. They completed their usual household chores and then went on to prepare dinner. Thinking that Mary might be hungry as well, they tried to wake her up. It was then that they realized that Mary had been lying lifeless in her bed all this time. What followed were shrilling screams of Mary's roommates trying to absorb what they had just witnessed. A motorcycle officer responded to those screams coming from the apartment and walked in. He found Mary's dead body with a dark-colored nylon stocking and two scarves around her neck. Her body was also covered in a maroon blanket. Senior authorities were informed, and as they arrived, an investigation was launched. After an autopsy, they found a foreign bodily fluid in Mary's body and on the maroon blanket. The autopsy report concluded that Mary had been assaulted and strangled to death. As forensic technology wasn't as advanced as it is today, the detectives preserved the foreign bodily fluid found in Mary's body as evidence for future use. Mary was only a few days shy from turning 20 when her chance at life was snatched away from her. The Boston Police Department geared up to get their hands on the killer. The original investigators had identified two possible suspects in the case, both of whom had access to Mary's apartment. The suspects were Mary's ex-boyfriend and one of her roommate's boyfriend. An important piece of evidence that connected the ex-boyfriend to the case was an ascot that was found cut up in the toilet. Mary had bought her ex-boyfriend ascots as presents. At the time, Mary's sister Diane Dodd believed that the ex-boyfriend was abusive towards Mary and that there was a high chance that he killed her. When the detectives questioned the people in and around the area where the crime took place, an eyewitness stepped up with some information about Mary. He claimed that he'd seen a man matching the description of her roommate's boyfriend in her apartment on the day she was killed. The day before the murder took place, Mary's roommate had spent the entire day with that boyfriend. It also turned out that a key to Mary's apartment had gone missing and her roommate's boyfriend was accused of taking possession of it secretly. Things weren't looking good for Mary's ex-boyfriend and her roommate's boyfriend at the time. The investigation only led the detectives to believe that either one or both of them were involved in Mary's merciless murder. With years of professional experience in the field, the detectives had observed that in homicide cases like Mary's, the killer was often someone the victim already knew. And with that theory in their minds, the police were sure that Mary's case was solvable and they'd soon have their hands on the killer. The evidence against Mary's ex-boyfriend and the roommate's boyfriend was strong enough to make the detectives believe that at least one or both of them had murdered Mary. They were put under a microscope and were being tailed by the police at all times. The detectives were hopeful that sooner or later, the boys would make a mistake and lead them to a clue. The detectives dedicated long hours to each passing day, but found nothing that could crack Mary's case. Even after being watched very closely, neither Mary's ex-boyfriend nor her roommate's boyfriend made any suspicious move. The detectives wondered whether these boys were outsmarting them or if they were actually innocent. But based on the facts that both of them had easy access to Mary's apartment and how convenient it would have been for them to murder Mary and escape without being suspected of anything, the police refrained from clearing them of suspicion. After days of not finding anything that could link either of them to Mary's murder, the detectives decided to take a crucial step. To know for sure if the roommate's boyfriend was involved in Mary's murder or not, he was made to take a polygraph test. However, its results were kept undisclosed and were never released to the general public. We'd love to hear from you. Eventually, when the police could find no evidence against them, the investigation into Mary's ex-boyfriend and the roommate's boyfriend stopped and both were let off the hook. But Mary's family was still convinced that the person who killed her was someone she knew. In the next few days, Mary was buried at St. Francis Xavier Cemetery, Centerville, Barnstable County, Massachusetts, USA. A crowd of Mary's loved ones gathered as they mourned her sudden departure. The investigation into Mary's case was barely progressing, and a string of killings that had been going on around Boston terrorized the whole country and took up most of the police department's attention. From the early 1960s, multiple women across Massachusetts had become the target of a serial killer who was still on the loose. He'd first assault his victims and then strangle them till their last breath. Some called him the Mad Strangler, while most referred to him as the Boston Strangler because all the victims were killed either in or around Boston. But after Mary's murder, those assaults and killings halted. The people thought that it was finally all over. But by then, the Boston Strangler had already killed 13 women between June 14, 1962 and January 4, 1964. The ages of the women killed ranged from 19 to 85. Most of them were single and had been assaulted, but all of them had been killed in their apartments and were strangled with some form of ligature that the killer found at the scene. The victims resided in the Back Bay, Beacon Hill, Brighton, Dorchester, Fenway, the South End, Cambridge, Lawrence, Lynn, and Salem, which were all in and around Boston. The police departments of the targeted areas were on alert at all times. Many residents purchased tear gas and new locks and deadbolts for their doors. Some women even moved out of the area. Police said the serial killer, notoriously known as the Boston Strangler, was a man who would dupe his way into the homes of trusting, unsuspecting women only to kill them once they let him inside. Initially, the police and the public were convinced that all the murders were the actions of one person. However, that theory was later put into doubt. With no sign of forced entry into their homes, the women were assumed to have let their killer in either because they knew him or because they believed him to be an apartment maintenance man, a delivery man, or some other serviceman. Even though the murders had stopped, the police didn't stop their search for the Boston Strangler. After his first assault and murder of a woman named Anna Slessors, a 55-year-old woman from Gainsborough Street, Boston, the attacks continued despite extensive media publicity. The case baffled the 5 separate district attorneys' offices investigating the murders because of the spread-out locations of the victims. But about 8 months after Mary's murder, on October 27, 1964, the police got a lead in the Boston Strangler killings. A woman reported that a stranger entered her home posing as a detective and then forcefully tied her to her bed. After that, he assaulted her and suddenly left. Before leaving, he apologized to the woman for what he did to her. The woman sat down with the detectives and gave a description of the man who had attacked her. This helped the police come up with a rough sketch of the man. The sketch was published in multiple newspapers and hung up in public areas. Soon, many women found the face in the sketch familiar and identified him as the man who'd assaulted them. An extensive search for the man guided the detectives to a 33-year-old man named Albert Henry DeSalvo. As many women had confirmed that this man was their assailant, he was arrested. Albert Henry DeSalvo was born on September 3, 1931 in Chelsea, Suffolk County, Massachusetts. His father, Frank DeSalvo, a plumber, and mother, Charlotte Irene Roberts Canosian. Then DeSalvo parented a total of 6 children. Albert's siblings were named Joseph Frank, Dorothy May, Richard Edward, Frank Jr., and Charlotte Irene DeSalvo. Albert grew up in an unpleasant environment at home as his father used to abuse Charlotte, Albert's mother, habitually. He was jailed twice for mistreating his family before Charlotte finally divorced him in 1944. Frank then married a woman named Mary Morrill, and Charlotte married a man named Vascon Paul Kinosian. As a young teenager, Albert turned out to be a notorious one and was arrested for breaking and entering homes to steal multiple times. At the age of just 17, he joined the army. Albert was stationed in Germany, where he met a German girl named Irmgard Beck and married her in 1953 in Frankfurt, Germany. He went on to have 2 children with Irmgard, a daughter named Judy and a son named Michael. Judy was born handicapped while Michael was a healthy child. Reassigned to Fort Dix, New Jersey, Albert was charged with abuse of a 9-year-old girl in January 1955, but the charges were dropped when the girl's mother failed to press charges. Albert was given an honorable discharge from the Army the next year. He was arrested in March 1960 for burglary, but was sentenced to 2 years for attempted breaking and entering. It was after his release in 1962 when he began his assaults on women. After his arrest in 1964, police sent Albert to Bridgewater State Hospital for his psychiatric observation. While he was there, he confessed to several murders to a fellow inmate named George Nasser, who was also a convicted murderer. Nasser reported the confession to his attorney, F. Lee Bailey. Bailey then went to police with the information, and he said Albert demonstrated that he knew details that only the killer would know. Albert was not initially suspected of being involved with the strangling murders. However, Albert stuck to his confession, saying that he was the Boston Strangler and provided precise details about 11 of the 13 murdered women that were linked to the Boston Strangler. The police were impressed at the accuracy of DeSalvo's descriptions of the crime scenes. There were definitely some inconsistencies, but Albert was able to cite details that had been withheld from the public. The police believed that they'd finally caught the Boston Strangler. They said that an announcement about the same would probably help put to rest speculation over the Boston Strangler's identity. It was a very challenging case, said Bailey. He thought that if he could get through the hustle of the legal procedures and get Albert examined by a team of the best specialists in the country, he might learn something about serial killers so people could spot them before anybody gets killed. However, in a turn of events, Bailey, who helped to obtain the confession from Albert, later went on to take the defense and represent Albert. Despite admitting to carrying out Mary's and other women's assault and murder, Albert was never charged for those crimes. This was because no physical evidence substantiated his confession, and hence, his confession was ruled inadmissible in court. However, Albert was sentenced to life in prison on unrelated charges involving armed robberies and other assaults. Albert's attorney Bailey believed that his client was actually the killer. Bailey brought up Albert's confession to the murders as part of his client's abusive history at the trial in order to assist in gaining a not guilty by reason of insanity verdict to the assaults and murders. But it was ruled as inadmissible by the judge. Convicted of the unrelated assaults, Albert was sentenced to life in prison in 1967. In February of that same year, Albert did something peculiar. He escaped with 2 fellow inmates while he was at the Bridgewater State Hospital. It was never known whether he and the other inmates had been planning the escape or if it was something that happened indecisively in the heat of the moment. The escape triggered a full-scale manhunt. A note written by Albert was found on his bunk addressed to the superintendent. In the note, Albert stated that he'd escaped to focus attention on the conditions of the hospital and his own situation. Surprisingly, right after his escape, Albert disguised himself as a U.S. Navy petty officer, 3rd class, but he gave himself up the following day. After his surrender, he was transferred to the maximum security Walpole State Prison. 6 years after his transfer, on November 26, 1973, Albert was found mysteriously stabbed to death in the infirmary of the same prison. It was believed he was killed sometime on November 25, 1973. He was 42. The details of his killer's identity were never made public. He was buried at Puritan Lawn Cemetery in Peabody, Essex County, Massachusetts, USA. While some did believe that Albert was the Boston Strangler, the others were sure that the real culprit was still roaming the streets. The detectives, too, were still confused about who really committed the Boston slayings, even though most of them were sure that Albert was, in fact, the Boston Strangler. However, the identity of the Boston Strangler was never confirmed and the case was put to rest. Nearly 3 decades after Albert's murder, The untouched question which had almost faded away resurfaced. In February, at the request of Albert and Mary's families, Massachusetts Attorney General Thomas Riley began reinvestigating Mary's murder. He said that the new findings didn't resolve the question of whether Albert killed Mary or not. Riley asked Albert's family to provide a DNA sample from a family member so investigators can conduct further tests. The family refused to do so until Riley's office turned over crime scene evidence to them, which Riley refused to do. The identity of the notorious Boston Strangler was cast into doubt again on Thursday, December 3, 2001. This happened when a team of forensic scientists exhumed the body of Mary sometime in February and Albert's body on Friday, October 26, 2001. They reveal the test conducted on Mary's clothing and remains discovered DNA from two individuals other than Mary. Neither of them was a match for Albert. Hence, the new DNA evidence failed to link Albert, the man who confessed to the string of 1960s rape murders, to Mary's killing. It's indicative, strongly indicative, of the fact that Albert DeSalvo was not the murderer of Mary Sullivan, said James Starrs, a George Washington University professor of law and forensic science who headed the forensic team. But former Massachusetts prosecutor Julian Soshnick, who interviewed Albert twice after he confessed to the killings in 1965, said the results don't prove Albert's innocence in Mary's murder or any of the other killings. It doesn't prove anything except that they found another person's DNA and a part of Miss Sullivan's body, said Soshnick. He also added that the Strangler didn't assault all of his victims. The question whether Albert was indeed the Boston Strangler raised many doubts. Some of those doubts were, there was never any physical evidence putting Albert at the crime scenes. He didn't match witness descriptions of possible suspects. And he was never on investigators' original list of more than 300 suspects. But Soshnick said he specifically asked Albert about Mary's case and 7 or 8 of the other murders, and Albert knew details that only the killer would know. He knew facts that were never revealed to the public or the media. For instance, Albert described accurate details about what type of ligatures were used and how they were tied. I believe that Albert was the Boston Strangler, Sasha concluded. Mary's nephew, Casey Sherman, who had believed for years that another man killed his aunt, was still not convinced that Albert was the Strangler. If he didn't kill Mary Sullivan, yet he confessed to it in glaring detail, he didn't kill any of these women, Casey said. He said police had a prime suspect in Mary's murder, but dropped pursuit of the man after Albert confessed. Casey believed the real killer was still alive, and he urged police again to focus on him. Albert and Mary's families believe that Albert only confessed to the killings because he hoped to make money from book and movie deals that would come his way after the publicity. After almost 5 decades of not knowing whether Albert did kill Mary or not, the NIJ, National Institute of Justice, stepped in and took charge. NIJ is the Research Development and Evaluation Agency of the U.S. Department of Justice. The NIJ was dedicated to improving knowledge and understanding of crime and justice issues through science. They provided objective and independent knowledge and tools to inform the decision-making of the criminal and juvenile justice communities, to reduce crime and advance justice, particularly at the state and local levels. The NIJ offered to help Boston's police force in investigating Mary's murder. And finally, they were able to solve this decades-old case. On July 11, 2013, the Boston Police Department announced that they'd found DNA evidence that strongly linked Albert to the murder of Mary Sullivan. A water bottle recovered from a construction site where Tim DeSalvo, Albert DeSalvo's nephew, worked, provided police the DNA evidence they needed to bring closure to a case that had been a mystery for nearly 50 years, murders for which no one had ever been charged. As the foreign bodily fluid found at Mary's crime scene was the only DNA evidence in the entire Boston Strangler investigation. Boston Police Crime Lab's lead forensic scientist Robert Hayes preserved 6 samples of that DNA evidence as he waited for technology to advance to the point where nuclear DNA could be positively matched to a suspect. The 2 techniques that opened the door leading to Mary's killer were mitochondrial DNA and familial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA tested DNA from the mitochondria of a human cell. Humans inherit mitochondrial DNA solely from their mother. Thus, siblings with the same mother would have identical mitochondrial DNA to each other, assuming that no mutation had occurred. Familial DNA analysis was based on the STR profiles found in databases such as the CODIS, combined DNA index system. The profile came from 13 locations in the genome. If all 26 alleles match a DNA profile in the database, it indicates that the DNA sample is the same man. First, the police had to make sure that the Y chromosomes in those DNA samples were a familial match to Albert in order to convince a judge to let the investigators disturb his grave again. So the Boston Police Department's Sergeant Brian Albert, a surveillance expert, followed Albert's nephew, Tim DeSalvo, to his worksite in Boston and retrieved a water bottle he drank from and left behind. Although the DNA recovered from the bottle was a familial match with the genetic material preserved from Mary's murder, it wasn't enough to close the case with certainty. But with the investigators' recent findings, a judge approved a warrant for Albert's exhumation, so a DNA sample could be taken directly from him. On Friday, July 12, 2013, DeSalvo's grave was excavated and his remains were transported to the office of the chief medical examiner. A DNA sample was extracted with the hopes of getting an exact match. Comparisons were made and the match was confirmed. Massachusetts top law enforcement officials revealed that DNA preserved from the body of the Boston Strangler's last victim, Mary Sullivan, can now be linked with great certainty to the late Albert DeSalvo. This is good evidence. This is strong evidence. This is reliable evidence. There can be no doubt, Suffolk County District Attorney Dan Conley said of the new DNA result. Familial match between biological evidence recovered from the crime scene and a suspect in Mary Sullivan's murder. That suspect is Albert DeSalvo. The match excluded 99.9% of the male population from suspicion in Mary Sullivan's killing. This pointed to Albert DeSalvo with near surety as the man responsible for Mary's assault and murder. I knew science would one day provide us with answers in this case. Boston Police Crime Lab's lead forensic scientist Robert Hayes said. By July 13, 2013, the new findings in the case had been made public. Questions that Mary's family had been asking for almost 50 years had finally been answered. Those answers provided comfort to Casey Sherman, Mary Sullivan's nephew whom she'd never met. I've lived with Mary's memory every day my whole life. And I didn't know nor did my mother know that other people were living with her memory as well. And it's amazing to me today to understand that people really did care about what happened to my aunt. In February 2003, Casey even wrote a book called A Rose for Mary about the investigation he launched to relieve his mother of her nightmares. Casey's mother Diane, Mary's younger sister, was just 17 when Mary was murdered. Diane finally got a sense of relief and closure when Mary's murderer's identity was confirmed. They and the families of all homicide victims should know that we will never stop working to find justice, accountability, and closure on their behalf, Suffolk County District Attorney Dan Conley said. Boston Police Commissioner Edward Davis praised the work of the relentless cold case squad, who refused to give up and waited until science advanced enough to crack the cold case. There were no comments made by Albert's family once he was identified as the Boston killer. But Elaine Sharp, a lawyer for the DeSalvo family, argued that the police had not legitimately identified Albert as the Boston Strangler. She added that Tim DeSalvo, Albert's nephew, did not know he'd been followed and inadvertently provided the evidence for the search warrant that led to Albert's body being exhumed. Just because they had DNA doesn't mean Albert DeSalvo killed her, Sharp said. Albert's family believed that there would still be reasonable doubt that Albert killed Mary even if additional DNA tests showed a 100% match. Sharp also stated that private testing of Mary's remains showed other male DNA was present as well. Massachusetts Attorney General Martha Coakley dismissed that assertion and said that the investigators may have solved one of the nation's most notorious serial killings. Like father, like son. Michael DeSalvo, Albert DeSalvo's son, who was born in 1960, didn't have a great life either. On the night of December 8, 2005, a 25-year-old girl named Angela Drake was reported missing. 2 weeks later, her half-naked body was found in a drainage ditch. An investigation led the police to Michael, and some of Angela's belongings, such as her identity card and clothing, were recovered from his place. With such strong evidence, he was immediately linked to Angela's murder and was arrested. He was 45 at the time. Michael later confessed that he killed Angela on the night of December 22, 2005 in Wisconsin. Once produced in court, Michael pleaded no contest of first-degree reckless homicide. narrowly dodging a first-degree murder conviction. Based on his guilty plea, Michael was sentenced to 25 years in prison on May 2, 2007. He was also sentenced to an additional 10 years of extended supervision, which the judge allowed him to serve in Minnesota provided he didn't return to Wisconsin. Michael was incarcerated at the Stanley Correctional Institution in Stanley, Wisconsin, with the possibility of his release by 2031. Since there were 2 other DNA samples recovered from the crime scene where Mary was murdered, do you think that Albert DeSalvo really was the Boston Strangler and responsible for killing Mary Sullivan? If not, to whom did those DNA samples belong? Let us know your thoughts. It was February 21, 1977 at around 8:40 p.m. when the Chicago Fire Department got a call from a concerned resident who noticed smoke emerging from an apartment on a lower floor. The firefighters promptly arrived at the scene and proceeded to inspect the apartment in search of any survivors. They made an unfortunate discovery when they came across the lifeless body of 48-year-old Teresita Bassa. However, it was evident that Teresita had not succumbed to the fire as a knife was still lodged in her chest. There appeared to be a far more twisted cause behind her demise. What was so unbelievable about this particular case? What could have happened that this case became an inspiration for movies and books for decades to come? Chicago is a vibrant city situated in the northeastern part of Illinois, USA. Known as the Windy City, it's nestled along the southwestern shore of Lake Michigan. The residents embrace a vibrant urban lifestyle with a rich cultural scene, renowned architecture, and diverse neighborhoods. However, like any major metropolis, Chicago does face challenges regarding crime. When compared to communities of all sizes across America, Chicago stands out with one of the highest crime rates at 33 incidents per 1,000 residents. Homicides and gun violence have been areas of concern, contributing to a perception of a higher crime rate compared to other cities. Moreover, the intriguing case of Teresita Bassa unfolded in the bustling city of Chicago from 1977 onwards. Teresita Bassa, born in the Philippines in 1929, embarked on a new chapter in her life when she immigrated to the United States in the 1960s. Initially drawn to study music, she developed a newfound interest in the human body and transitioned to work as a respiratory therapist at Edgewater Hospital near Chicago. Alongside her career, Teresita pursued a master's degree in music, showcasing her ambition and dedication. She even performed in a band called Mahogany 5+1. Colleagues and friends described her as an intelligent yet quiet woman who had a laid-back lifestyle. Despite the demands of her work and studies, Teresita found joy in sharing her musical talents with the community by teaching neighborhood children how to play the piano. Teresita made the decision to rent an apartment in the Lincoln Park area, which had a somewhat dubious reputation during the 1970s. Despite its sketchy nature, she sought out a spacious apartment that could accommodate her beloved piano. Fortunately, her well-paying job provided her with the means to afford the dwelling of her dreams. While Teresita's life seemed to be going well in many aspects, one significant element was missing: a life partner with whom she could share her future. However, she was single even in her late 40s by choice. Her decision to remain single was influenced by an incident that occurred about a decade earlier when she was in a relationship with a man from Chicago. They were having quite a good life and she was planning on getting married soon. Her boyfriend even flew with her to her home in the Philippines and quickly earned her family's trust. However, it all changed one night when her boyfriend found himself in a compromising situation, discovered naked with a teenage girl on his lap in the midst of a red light area. When Teresita's father learned of this, he threw him out of their home, abruptly concluding their love story. This heartbreaking betrayal left Teresita with deep wounds and a loss of trust in romantic relationships. From that point forward, she made the conscious decision never to pursue dating again. As time passed, Teresita made a life-altering decision to spend the remainder of her days in the United States. The country had become her home, and the bond she had formed with her friends and community played a significant role in solidifying her commitment to staying. Teresita's life prior to her immigration from the Philippines remained shrouded in mystery, but her passion for music and dedication to her profession left a lasting impact on those who knew her. Moreover, Her humble and hard-working nature made her an unlikely victim in the unfortunate events that were soon to unfold. On February 21, 1977, a fateful day for Teresita Bassa, she arrived at her workplace, Edgewater Hospital, located at 5700 North Ashland Avenue in Chicago. It appeared to be a typical day as she carried out her duties. At around 5:30 p.m., she left work and headed home to her apartment at 2740 North Pine Grove in Lincoln Park, Chicago. Little did she know that the course of events would soon take a dark turn. Around 10 p.m., the Chicago Fire Department received a call from a concerned resident in Teresita's building. The caller reported a fire incident on the 15th floor, alerted by the smoke emanating from Teresita's apartment. Responding promptly, the fire department arrived at the scene and worked diligently to extinguish the flames. Upon entering Teresita's apartment, they made a shocking discovery. The fire had originated from a pile of clothes on the floor. However, as the authorities searched the premises, they made an even more horrifying revelation. Under a burning mattress, they found Teresita's lifeless and unclothed body with a butcher knife still embedded in her chest. The evidence pointed unmistakably to a homicide, leaving no doubt that Teresita had tragically become a victim of a violent crime. Teresita Bassa's tragic discovery revealed a gruesome scene as her body exhibited multiple stab wounds with the knife still lodged in her chest. Upon arriving at the scene, the investigators from the Chicago Police Department immediately noticed the perpetrator's deliberate attempt to conceal their actions by starting a fire in the apartment. Despite the initial suggestion of an assault due to Teresita's bareness, the autopsy results contradicted this assumption. The investigators faced a perplexing case, lacking an apparent motive for the crime. The intensity of the fire had destroyed most physical evidence, making the investigation more challenging. Only a few strands of hair were found on Teresita's left arm. Even Teresita's background didn't indicate any known enemies or involvement in high-risk activities. However, a key lead emerged when the investigators discovered a note with a cryptic message, "Get theater tickets for AS," offering a clue to unravel the case. However, despite the diligent efforts of investigators, the case of Teresita's murder seemed to lead nowhere. Her friends and neighbors were unaware of anyone who would have wished her harm, and there were no noticeable anomalies on the night of the incident. However, a significant breakthrough occurred when the police began interviewing Teresita's colleagues at the Edgewater Hospital. During these interviews, they discovered that a doctor from the hospital had spoken with Teresita on the phone on the night of the murder. According to his account, while engaged in conversation around 7 p.m., he heard a knock at Teresita's door while on the call with her. Although she didn't disclose the visitor's identity, she mentioned that they were interested in purchasing concert tickets. Further investigation uncovered another call made to Teresita that night. Ruth Loeb, her colleague, had reached out to plan a lunch date, but she heard a man's voice in the background. Ruth offered to call back later if Teresita was occupied. When she was questioned by the investigators about the man's voice or any suspicious behavior, Ruth described the conversation as entirely normal, even noting that she heard Teresita laugh at something he said. Based on these statements, investigators concluded that the killer was a man known to Teresita. They believed he'd been present at her apartment between approximately 7:40 p.m. and 8:30 p.m. Armed with this timeline, investigators pursued various leads, but each one ultimately led to dead ends. The initials AS that the investigators found on the letter surfaced as a potential clue, but the meaning of the letters remained unknown. By April 1977, the investigation had reached a standstill, and Teresita Bassa's case went cold. However, in an intriguing turn of events, Detective Joseph Stachula, who was handling Teresita Bassa's case, received a lead in August 1977, 5 months after the murder. The Evanston police informed him about a man named Alan Showery, who happened to work at Edgewater Hospital just like the victim. What made this discovery even more intriguing was that Showery shared the same initials as the note found in Teresita's apartment. The circumstances surrounding how the Evanston police became aware of Showery were peculiar. To delve deeper into Alan Showery and gather more information about the case, Detective Stachula was instructed to reach out to Dr. Jose Chua, the individual who had provided the details to the Evanston police. Just like Teresita, Dr. Chua and his wife Remy Bias were immigrants from the Philippines residing in Evanston. Detective Statula faced initial reluctance from the couple who harbored fears that their account would be dismissed by authorities due to how unbelievable it sounded. Their concerns were valid considering the extraordinary nature of the story they wanted to share. It required persistent persuasion from Statula before Dr. Chua mustered the courage to disclose what he knew. Dr. Chua recounted a perplexing incident where his wife, Remy, abruptly rose from their living room and proceeded into their bedroom. Intrigued, he followed her and discovered her lying on the bed in a trance-like state. To his astonishment, when he inquired about her condition, she began speaking in a different voice, using their native language Tagalog. Seeking to ascertain her love of lucidity, he posed the question, "What's your name?" To which she replied, "Akawe Teresita Basa," meaning "I am Teresita Basa." Dr. Jose Chua clarified that he had no prior knowledge of Teresita or her murder. Engaging in a conversation with his wife, Remy, who seemed to be in an altered state, he continued to communicate with her. It was during this state that she identified herself as Teresita Basa and disclosed the name of the person responsible for Teresita's death. It was indeed Alan Showery, the AS in the note found in Teresita's burnt apartment. Remy revealed that she'd allowed Showery into her apartment under the assumption of their friendship, only to be stabbed by him. After the trans ended, Remy returned to her usual self and the couple discussed the extraordinary incident. They made the mutual decision to keep the matter confidential, fearing that others would dismiss their account as implausible and ridicule them. They were content to keep the experience within their own knowledge, unwilling to risk being viewed as foolish or unreliable by sharing such an extraordinary occurrence. Could it truly be the spirit of Teresita possessing Remy? Could spirits actually exist, and could they go to such lengths to find peace? These questions pushed the boundaries of belief and tested the detective's grasp on reality. The circumstances seemed implausible, yet the couple, Dr. Chua and Remy, had no apparent reason to lie about an incident they knew nothing about, Teresita's death or the involvement of Alan Showery. The homicide case had taken an unexpected turn, transforming into a supernatural story in the blink of an eye. The detective and everyone else were unsure how to deal with the situation involving spirits and their supposed involvement in the real world. Despite the skepticism, they couldn't afford to dismiss this startling revelation. It stood as the most significant lead they'd stumbled upon in their prolonged investigation, urging them to explore its implications further, no matter how extraordinary they may seem. However, Dr. Chua's account took a more perplexing turn as he revealed additional encounters with a persistent spirit of Teresita Basa. He shared that a second incident unfolded, during which Teresita, through his wife Remy, implored the doctor once again for assistance. This time, she conveyed a crucial piece of information. Investigators would require concrete evidence to secure a conviction against her murderer. Astonishingly, Teresita disclosed that Alan Showery, the man whose initials were found in her apartment, had stolen a pearl ring and a jade pendant from her, and the evidence could only be found in his apartment. Shockingly, this was an unknown detail to the police. The supernatural encounters didn't cease there. Teresita visited the Chua couple for a third time, asking why they still hadn't reached out to the police. This encounter solidified their decision to finally come forward and divulge their extraordinary story to the authorities. The sheer magnitude of these inexplicable events propelled the detective and his team into uncharted territory, forcing them to confront the possibility that there might be more to this case than meets the eye. The revelations provided by Teresita's spirit opened up new avenues of investigation and ignited a glimmer of hope for a breakthrough in solving her tragic murder. However, the puzzling question that still lingered was, how could any of this be possible? To delve deeper into the matter, we must rewind a few months back to the murder of Teresita Basa. To fully comprehend the gravity of their account, the police conducted an interview with Remy to gather more details. During the interview, Remy revealed that her inexplicable experiences began shortly after Teresita's untimely death. One particular evening, while Remy was working the night shift at the hospital, she sought a moment of respite in the hospital's lounge. It was there that she encountered the spirit of Teresita standing right before her. Initially dismissing it as fatigue-induced hallucinations, Ramy attempted to shrug off the encounter. However, to her astonishment, she experienced a similar encounter once again, causing her to grow increasingly fearful. She started to believe that Teresita's spirit was lingering at the hospital, aimlessly wandering. However, she got the hunch that maybe Teresita's spirit was trying to communicate with her. This unsettling notion heightened when Remy returned home and found herself unexpectedly possessed, as her husband has previously described. It seemed that Teresita's spirit was indeed attempting to communicate with her through these eerie encounters. As an investigator, Joseph Stachula worked with facts and information that could be backed by scientific evidence. But at the time, Dr. Jose Chua's story was the only lead they had in the case. He tracked down Showery and asked him about Teresita Bassa, and although Showery admitted to knowing her, he denied going to her apartment the night she died. Later, he changed his statement and said that he went to her place to fix her television. While visiting Showery, investigators noticed that the woman he lived with, Yanka Kamluk, was wearing a ring that looked like the stolen jewelry of Teresita's that Dr. Chua had described. When questioned, Yanka said Showery gifted her the ring sometime in February 1978 as a late Christmas present. However, when the jewelry was shown to Teresita's family, they confirmed that it was the same ring she owned. With pieces of evidence piling up against him, Showery confessed to the murder. He then changed his story after the confession. Showery said that he knew Teresita from work, and knowing that he was in a tough financial spot, she tipped him generously for helping her with errands and other tasks. That night, on February 21, 1977, he went to Teresita's apartment to rob her, but it took a turn for the worse and he ended up stabbing her. He removed her clothes to make it look like an assault had taken place and set fire to the apartment to get rid of any traces of evidence. Taking his statement into account, the police booked him in 1978. When the news of Alan Showery's arrest became public, several female workers from Edgewater Hospital came forward with statements about their past relationships with Showery. They revealed that he had a reputation for being a ladies' man and was known for selling jewelry at the hospital. However, there were suspicions that some of the jewelry he'd sold had been stolen. As the police delved further into Showery's life, they discovered that he'd been previously married and had a child in Alabama but had abandoned them and moved to Chicago. Showery stood trial, and just before the proceedings began, the Chicago Tribune ran a headline, "Did Voice from Gravefinger Murder Suspect?" This headline garnered attention both locally and internationally. The Voice from the Grave case finally began in January 1979 in Judge Frank Barabara's courtroom, but the proceedings progressed slowly due to the heavy winters that year. During the prosecution held in 1979, a total of 13 witnesses testified over the course of 5 days before a jury consisting of 8 men and 4 women. Interestingly, the Chuas, Dr. Jose Chua and Remy Chua, testified as witnesses for the defense rather than the prosecution. Throughout the trial, Showery was found to have a propensity for lying, making it challenging for his defense attorney, Bill Swannow, to mount a strong case. Although Showery had initially confessed to the crime, his defense filed a motion to suppress his confession. While the motion was ultimately denied, it was a strategic move aimed at highlighting the unusual circumstances surrounding the case, particularly the involvement of a ghost as a tip-off to investigators. As the trial continued, Showery's lawyer, Bill Swannow, took an opportunity to redirect the flow of the case. He acknowledged that Teresita was indeed a victim of homicide, but Showery was not the killer. In the midst of his statement, Swannow raised suspicions about someone else. He pointed out that Remy Chua, who claimed to be possessed by Teresita's spirit, was on the verge of being fired from Edgewater Hospital at the time of the murder. Swannow weaved together pieces of information to form an accusation against Remy. This was a significant development as the prosecution had based their accusations on the testimony of a ghost. Swannow seized this opportunity to shift the direction of the entire case and cast doubt on Remy's credibility. Swannow suggested that Remy might have mental health issues or fabricated the entire story, placing his client Showery in the middle of it. He urged the jury not to trust Remy's statements about a ghost, dismissing them as silly. The state's attorney, who had taken Showery's confession, was called as the next witness. He provided detailed testimony about Showery's confession, describing how Showery admitted to choking Teresita, stealing money, dragging her to the bedroom, undressing her, stabbing her in the chest, setting her mattress on fire, stealing her jewelry, and ransacking the apartment. Showery's 13-page confession left the courtroom in silence. Realizing that Showery was in a precarious situation, Swano wasted no time in presenting his defense. On the next day of the trial, he called residents of Teresita's building as witnesses and asked if they'd ever seen Showery. The consistent answer from each witness was no. Swano also brought in an evidence technician who provided intriguing information even by the standards of 1979. The technician testified that 5 strands of hair were found on Teresita's left arm. However, when tested, it was determined that the sample did not belong to either Teresita or Showery. Swano seized this opportunity to raise suspicions about Remy once again. He brought up Remy's side business of selling jewelry and revealed that she had sold jewelry to his client Showery. With this new twist in the case, Remy found herself facing intense interrogation. Swano asked her if she had sold Teresita's jewelry to Showery, to which she replied no. Swano was reluctant to let go of this situation, but with no evidence against Remy, she was eventually cleared of suspicion. Dr. Chua in the trial described their encounter with Teresita's spirit to the jury, who found it interesting yet unbelievable. By the 5th day of the trial, Showery changed his tune and claimed that his confession to the crime was coerced. He stated that 2 years earlier, the police had fed him information and threatened to arrest him and his pregnant girlfriend on murder charges if he didn't confess. Showery maintained his innocence and provided an alibi for the night of the murder. According to Showery's account, he had dinner with his girlfriend, Yanko, on the night of the murder and later engaged in activities such as drinking and playing darts with a neighbor around 7:30 p.m. He then returned to his place with his girlfriend at around 10 p.m. The judge faced a challenging task of reaching a definitive conclusion as the trial progressed and various statements were presented. On one side, there was evidence and suspicions, while on the other side, there was a perplexing factor of a message from a ghost. The case presented a unique and unfamiliar situation for everyone involved, making it particularly difficult for the judge to come to a firm decision. Following a deadlock in the jury, the trial concluded in a mistrial on January 26, 1979, as they were unable to reach a unanimous decision regarding the case. However, approximately a month later and almost 2 years after Teresita's murder, Alan Showery made the decision to plead guilty to the killing while awaiting a new trial. Despite his lawyers advising against it, cautioning him not to risk facing another jury, Showery chose to take responsibility for the crime. Alan Showery was subsequently sentenced to a combined total of 14 years in prison for the charges of murder, robbery, and arson. He served his sentence at Statesville Correctional Center near Joliet. However, Showery was granted parole and released from prison in July 1983 after serving 4 years of his sentence. Even though he served time for Teresita's murder, one question lingered. Why did he choose to confess to the murderer when he could have been allowed to go free? However, his whereabouts currently are unknown, and so is the answer. Various theories have emerged from those who have followed and written about the case over the years. Some suggest that Dr. Chua's involvements and knowledge of Showery may have been subconscious, possibly stemming from a fear or aversion towards him. It's also speculated that Dr. Chua might have overheard or witnessed Showery discussing his involvement in the crime without consciously registering the information or knowing how to express it. On the other hand, there are those who view the story as compelling evidence of paranormal phenomena. So what do you think? Was it really Teresita's spirit who solved the case? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. If there's a case you'd like us to cover, don't hesitate to share your suggestions. Also, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, stay safe.